The boardroom fell silent as Damien Carter's face appeared on every screen in the conference hall. Security was already moving toward him, but it was too late. Encrypted financial records were spilling across the presentation displays, connecting Laurent Dynamics executives to foreign shell corporations. Celeste Laurent stood frozen at the podium, watching her billion-dollar deal disintegrate in real time. Somewhere in the back of the room, a 7-year-old girl clutched her backpack, wondering why everyone was suddenly shouting at her father. In less than 60 seconds, a single father working night shifts had just declared war on Silicon Valley's most powerful woman. If you want to see how a struggling analyst and an Ice Queen CEO took down a conspiracy that nearly destroyed America's infrastructure, stay with me until the end. And hit that like button. Comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. Damien Carter had exactly 14 minutes before his daughter's school bus arrived, and he was still staring at code that shouldn't exist. The office was empty at 6:47 a.m. Laurent Dynamics didn't officially open until 8, but Damien had been here since 4, the way he'd been arriving for the past 3 months. Night shifts paid better, but they also meant Emma had to get herself ready for school most mornings, while he caught 2 hours of sleep on the couch before starting his day job. The arrangement was brutal, but the medical bills from her mother's final months didn't care about his sleep schedule. He scrolled through another section of the defense contract architecture, his coffee going cold beside the keyboard. The AI system itself was brilliant. Adaptive cybersecurity that could protect military networks, power grids, critical infrastructure. Celeste Laurent had spent 4 years developing it, turning Laurent Dynamics from a mid-tier software company into a defense contractor worth billions. The contract signing was scheduled for Thursday, 3 days away. But buried in subsection 7442 of the authentication protocols was something that made Damien's stomach turn. A back door. Not the obvious kind that security audits would catch. This was elegant, hidden inside what looked like standard error-checking code. Someone with the right access credentials could slip through after the system went live, pulling data without leaving traces. Military communications, infrastructure vulnerabilities. Everything the AI was supposed to protect would be exposed to whoever held those credentials. Damien had found it by accident, tracking down what he thought was a minor synchronization bug. He'd been awake for 21 hours when he spotted the discrepancy, and at first he'd assumed he was seeing things. But 3 cups of coffee and 4 different analysis approaches later, the code was still there. His phone buzzed. Emma, texting from home. Bus in 10 minutes. Did you sign my permission slip? Shit. He'd forgotten. Again. Damien saved his findings to an encrypted partition, logged out of the system, and grabbed his jacket. The permission slip was probably still sitting on the kitchen counter where Emma had left it yesterday. He was a terrible father. No, that wasn't fair. He was an exhausted father doing his best with impossible circumstances. Some days he couldn't tell the difference. The drive home took 8 minutes. Emma was waiting on the front steps, backpack already on, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail that looked like she'd done it herself. She probably had. She was 7 but carried herself like someone much older, the way kids did when they had to grow up faster than they should. You forgot, she said. I know. I'm sorry. Damien rushed past her into the house, finding the crumpled permission slip under a stack of unopened mail. He scribbled his signature. Here, you're good. Emma took it without comment, but her expression said everything. You're always forgetting, you're always tired. I know you're trying. How was work? She asked as they walked back toward the bus stop. Complicated. Is that code for bad? But Damien almost smiled. It's code for, I found something I shouldn't have found, and now I have to figure out what to do about it. Tell your boss? It's not that simple. The yellow bus rounded the corner, brakes squealing. Emma adjusted her backpack straps. When I find something wrong, my teacher says I should tell someone even if it's scary. Maybe adult rules aren't that different. She climbed onto the bus before Damien could respond. Through the window, she gave him a small wave. He waved back, watching until the bus disappeared around the corner. Tell someone even if it's scary. Yeah, that was the problem, wasn't it? Because the kind of code Damien had found didn't appear by accident. Someone had put it there. Someone with high-level access to the contract architecture. And if he went to the wrong person, he wouldn't just lose his job. He might lose a lot more than that. Laurent Dynamics occupied 47 floors of a glass tower in downtown San Francisco. The lobby alone cost more than Damien's entire neighborhood, all polished marble and digital art installations that shifted colors based on the time of day. Security was tight, badge scanners, facial recognition, random checks. Damien had worked here for 18 months and still felt like an intruder every time he walked through the doors. His supervisor, Marcus Webb, was already at his desk when Damien arrived on the 23rd floor. Marcus was 45, competent, and perpetually stressed about meeting deadlines. He'd hired Damien specifically for night shift analysis work, which paid 30% more than day shifts, but came with the understanding that you didn't bother anyone unless the building was literally on fire. "You look like hell," Marcus said without looking up from his monitor. "Thanks. I need to talk to you about the defense contract." That got Marcus's attention. "What about it?" Damien glanced around the open plan office. A few other analysts were filtering in, grabbing coffee, booting up their systems. Not the right place for this conversation. "Can we use a conference room?" Marcus's expression shifted from tired to wary. "This sounds serious." "It is." They ended up in a small, glass-walled room overlooking the city. Damien pulled up his findings on the conference display, walking Marcus through the authentication protocols, showing him exactly where the back door was hidden. Marcus's face went from skeptical to concerned to something close to panic in the span of 3 minutes. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked. "I've checked it 6 different ways. It's there. Who else knows?" "Just you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the code on the screen. Damien could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Career implications, legal liability, internal politics. The defense contract was the biggest deal in Laurent Dynamics history. Celeste Laurent herself had negotiated it, appeared on magazine covers talking about it, built her entire public image around being the woman who brought military-grade cybersecurity into the modern age. If something was wrong with the contract, it wasn't just a technical problem. It was a corporate earthquake. "We need to escalate this," Marcus said finally. "But carefully. This goes straight to executive review, not through normal channels." Executive review meaning who? Meaning Richard Voss. He's the CTO. If anyone can verify this and decide what to do, it's him. Damien didn't know much about Richard Voss except that he'd been with Celeste since the beginning, one of the original 3 founders when Laurent Dynamics was still operating out of a garage in Palo Alto. If the backdoor was real, Voss would have the technical chops to understand it. And if it was sabotage, he'd have the authority to stop the contract before it was too late. "When?" Damien asked. "I'll set up a meeting for this afternoon. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone else about this. And for the love of everything, don't put it in any company communication systems. If someone really did plant this code, they're watching." Damien felt something cold settle in his chest. "You think it's internal?" "I think code like that doesn't write itself. And I think if you found it by accident, whoever put it there is going to be very interested in who's looking at it now." Emma's school called it 11:30 a.m. Damien was in the middle of documenting his findings for the meeting with Richard Voss when his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Carter, this is Principal Davies at Brightwood Elementary." His heart dropped. "Is Emma okay?" "She's fine, but there's been a situation. The school district just announced an emergency closure, water main break affecting 3 buildings, ours included. We're sending students home early. Emma's bus route won't run today. Can you pick her up?" Damien looked at the time. The meeting with Voss was scheduled for 2 p.m. Emma's school was a 30-minute drive each way, longer with midday traffic. If he left now, he'd barely make it back in time. If he didn't leave, Emma would be sitting in the school office for hours. "I'll be there," he said. Marcus wasn't happy when Damien explained the situation. "This meeting is critical. Voss is only available for a 2-hour window before he leaves for the Investor Summit prep. I know. I'll make it back. I just need to get my daughter and bring her home." "Bring her here," Marcus said suddenly. "We've got visitor passes. She can wait in the employee lounge while you're in the meeting." Damien hesitated. He'd never brought Emma to work. The idea made him uncomfortable. Mixing his desperate scrambling with the polished corporate world felt like inviting disaster. But Marcus was right. If he drove Emma home and came back, he'd miss the meeting entirely. "Okay," he said. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just get back before 2. Butch. Emma was waiting outside the school office when Damien arrived, her backpack sitting beside her like a faithful dog. She didn't complain about being picked up early, didn't ask why they weren't going home. She just climbed into the passenger seat and buckled herself in. "We're going to my work," Damien said. "I have an important meeting. You'll have to wait for me." "How long?" "Couple hours, maybe." "That's okay. I brought a book." Of course she had. Emma always had a book. She read like someone afraid the words might disappear if she looked away too long. Laurent Dynamics during the day was a different animal than the empty floors Damien usually navigated. The lobby was packed. People in expensive suits, visitor badges, security escorts. Damien checked them in, got Emma a bright yellow visitor sticker, and led her through the scanning stations. She stayed close to him, eyes wide, taking in the massive digital displays and the glass elevators rising through the center of the atrium. "Your office is really big," she said quietly. "It's not my office. I just work here." Still, the 23rd floor was chaos. People were rushing between conference rooms, phones pressed to their ears, tablet screens glowing. Damien caught fragments of conversation. Summit prep, investor concerns, media strategy. Thursday's contract signing wasn't just a business deal. It was a spectacle. Hundreds of people would be here. Investors, politicians, journalists. Celeste Laurent would stand at a podium and officially transform her company into a defense industry giant. And if Damien was right, she'd be signing over access to critical military infrastructure to whoever had planted that back door. He settled Emma in the employee lounge with her book and a bottle of water. "I'll come get you as soon as I'm done. Don't leave this room, okay?" "I won't." "I'm serious, Em. Stay here." "I know, Dad. I'm not 6. No, she wasn't. She was 7 going on 30, and sometimes Damien forgot how much weight she carried without ever complaining about it. But, The meeting with Richard Voss took place in a secured conference room on the 41st floor. Marcus was already there when Damien arrived, along with 2 people Damien didn't recognize. A severe-looking woman in her 50s and a younger man with the kind of perfect posture that screamed military background. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, "I'm Andrea Cross, head of legal compliance. This is Daniel Park, security oversight. Walk us through what you found." Damien did, displaying the code architecture on the main screen, highlighting the hidden authentication bypass, explaining how it would function once the system went live. He'd rehearsed this 3 times in his head on the drive back from Emma's school, but actually saying it out loud made it sound insane. He was a low-level analyst. These were people who decided corporate strategy, who reported directly to Celeste Laurent. Who was he to tell them their billion-dollar contract was compromised? But the code didn't lie. When Damien finished, Andrea Cross leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "Richard, can you verify this?" Richard Voss had been silent the entire presentation, his expression unreadable. Now he stood, moving to the display, pulling up sections of code that Damien had flagged. His fingers moved across the interface with practiced precision. Minutes passed. The room was completely silent except for the soft clicking of keyboard commands. Finally, Voss spoke. "It's real." Andrea's face went pale. "You're certain?" "I wrote half of this architecture myself. I know what should be here. This," he gestured at the screen, "shouldn't." "But then how did it get there, Anarts?" Daniel Park asked. "That," Voss said, "is the question, isn't it?" Andrea stood, gathering her tablet. "We need to inform Ms. Laurent immediately. The contract signing is in 3 days. If this code exists, we need to halt everything until we understand the scope of the breach." "Agreed, Voss said. "But carefully. If this is sabotage, whoever planted it has high-level access. They'll know the moment we start investigating. Then we lock it down now. Full security audit, limited access, complete communication blackout until we know what we're dealing with." Damien felt a strange sense of relief. He'd done what Emma said, told someone, even though it was scary. Now it was out of his hands. The adults were handling it. That relief lasted approximately 4 more minutes. Andrea's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, then looked up at Voss. Celeste wants to see us. All of us. Right now. Does she know about this? Marcus asked. I didn't tell her, but she's asking for Damien specifically. Damien's relief evaporated. Why would she want to see me? I don't know, Andrea said. But when Celeste Laurent summons you to the 47th floor, you go. The 47th floor was where the real power lived. Executive suites, private conference rooms, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire Bay Area. Damien had never been up here. People like him didn't get invited to the 47th floor unless something had gone very wrong or very right. This didn't feel like very right. They were escorted into a massive corner office that looked more like a penthouse apartment than a workspace. Minimalist furniture, abstract art, a glass desk that probably cost more than Damien's car. And standing behind that desk, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was Celeste Laurent. Damien had seen her before, press conferences, company-wide video announcements, magazine covers. But seeing her in person was different. She was 30 years old but carried herself with the kind of certainty that made age irrelevant. Dark hair pulled back severely, tailored suit that probably had a designer named Damien wouldn't recognize, eyes that were currently fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to apologize for existing. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice was calm, controlled. You've been busy. Ms. Laurent, I can explain. Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent the morning spreading panic about a contract that's been reviewed by 30 different experts over 4 years. A contract that represents the future of this company. Andrea stepped forward. Celeste, he found something legitimate. Richard verified a section of code that looks unusual. That doesn't mean it's sabotage. It means we have an analyst, she gestured at Damien, who doesn't understand the full architecture making assumptions that could destroy investor confidence 3 days before the most important signing in this company's history. Damien felt his face flush. With respect, Ms. Laurent, I know what I found. That code creates a backdoor into the entire system. No, Celeste said coldly. That code creates a secondary authentication pathway for authorized federal oversight. It's part of the contract specifications. Did you even read the compliance documentation before you decided to play hero? Damien opened his mouth, closed it. Had he read the compliance documentation? He'd read the technical specifications, the architecture blueprints, the security protocols, but the legal compliance paperwork? That was thousands of pages of bureaucratic language that had nothing to do with code. I thought not, Celeste continued. Mr. Carter, I understand you're under a lot of personal stress. Single parent, financial difficulties, working double shifts. That's admirable. But it also means you're exhausted, and exhausted people make mistakes. What you found is a feature, not a flaw, and your panic is about to cost this company millions in investor confidence if we're not careful. Andrea tried again. Celeste, we should at least run a full security audit. We've run 6 audits. Federal regulators have reviewed every line of code. The Pentagon signed off on this contract. Are you suggesting they're all wrong and Mr. Carter is right? No one answered. Celeste turned back to Damien and her expression softened slightly. Not warm, but less like she was about to have him thrown off the roof. I know you thought you were helping. I appreciate diligence. But you're out of your depth here. Go back to your regular duties. Let the people who understand the full scope of this contract handle it. And in the future, if you find something concerning, bring it to your supervisor before causing a panic among the executive team. She was dismissing him, not just from the meeting, from the conversation entirely, as if his concerns were the confused worries of someone too small to understand how big business worked. But that's all, Mr. Carter. Emma was still in the employee lounge when Damien got back, curled up in a chair with her book. She looked up when he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her close the book immediately. Are you okay? Yeah, Damien lied. Meeting's over. Let's go home. They didn't speak in the elevator, didn't speak crossing the lobby. But when they reached the parking garage, Emma stopped walking. Did something bad happen? Damien unlocked the car, opened her door. "Get in, Em." "Dad?" He sighed, leaning against the car frame. "I found something wrong at work. I told people about it, and they told me I was wrong and didn't know what I was talking about. But you're really smart. You know computers better than anyone." Apparently not better than the people who actually make decisions. "So what are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was he going to do? Celeste Laurent had made it clear he was supposed to go back to his desk, do his job, and forget he'd ever seen that code. Andrea and Richard had been overruled. The contract signing would proceed as planned. And if Damien was right, if that really was a backdoor and not an authorized federal pathway, then in 3 days, someone would have access to systems that controlled power grids, communication networks, military infrastructure. "I don't know," he told his daughter honestly. They drove home in silence. But when Damien was getting Emma ready for bed that night, she looked up at him with those 2 serious eyes and said, "My teacher says that doing the right thing is usually the hard thing. That's how you know it's right." Damien kissed her forehead. "Go to sleep, Emma." But after she was asleep, he sat in the living room with his laptop, staring at the encrypted partition where he'd saved his findings. Celeste Laurent had the power to fire him, blacklist him from the industry, make sure he never worked in tech again. She could bury him without breaking a sweat. But Emma was right. If the right thing was usually the hard thing, then what Damien did next would probably be the hardest thing he'd ever done. He opened a new terminal window and started writing code. The code Damien wrote that night wasn't elegant. It was desperate, built from spare parts of old security scripts and brute force analysis tools he'd cobbled together over 18 months of night shifts. The goal was simple: trace the backdoor code to its origin point. Find out who wrote it, when it was added, and who had access to that section of the architecture during the critical development window. By 3 a.m., he had something that might work. By 4 a.m., he'd tested it against dummy systems and felt confident it wouldn't trigger any alarms. By 5 a.m., he was back at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen and wondering if running this program would get him arrested. Emma appeared in the doorway, dragging her blanket. "You didn't sleep again." "Couldn't." "Is it about work?" "Yeah." She climbed into the chair next to him, still half asleep. "Are you going to get in trouble?" Damien closed the laptop. "I might." "Then why are you doing it?" "Because if he didn't, people could die. Infrastructure failures, power grids collapsing, communication systems going dark. That's what happened when military-grade cybersecurity got compromised. Not movie-style explosions, but slow-motion disasters that hurt the people who could least afford it. People like him and Emma, who depended on systems working because they didn't have backup plans. But he couldn't explain that to a 7-year-old who just wanted her dad to be safe. "Because someone has to," he said finally. Emma nodded like that made perfect sense, then put her head on his shoulder and fell back asleep. Damien sat there holding her, watching the dawn light creep across their small kitchen, knowing that in a few hours he'd have to make a choice that would probably destroy what little stability they had left. He ran the program at 6:15 a.m. from the Laurent Dynamics parking garage, sitting in his car with his laptop connected through a mobile hotspot instead of the company network. If anyone was monitoring internal traffic, they wouldn't see this coming from inside. And if his access got revoked the moment he started digging, at least he'd have whatever data he could grab before they shut him down. The program took 43 minutes to compile results. When it finished, Damien spent another 10 minutes just staring at the screen, trying to convince himself he was reading it wrong. The backdoor code had been added 9 months ago, during a routine security update. The commit signature belonged to someone with executive-level access, and the IP address traced back to a workstation on the 46th floor, right below Celeste Laurent's office, in the executive wing where only the company's original founders had offices: Richard Voss, Daniel Park, and Jonathan Brennan, the company's CFO. One of them had planted the back door, or someone had used their credentials to do it. Either way, this wasn't some rogue analyst or outside hacker. This was internal sabotage at the highest level. Damien forwarded the data to his encrypted partition, then deleted every trace of the program from his laptop. His hands were shaking. He needed to tell someone, but who? Andrea Cross reported to the executive team. Marcus Webb didn't have the authority to act on something this big. And going to Celeste Laurent again would just get him fired faster, especially after yesterday's meeting. He was still sitting in the parking garage when his phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Where are you? Building's on lockdown. Get inside now." Lockdown? Damien grabbed his laptop and ran. The lobby was chaos. Security personnel were checking every badge twice, running additional scans, questioning anyone who looked even slightly out of place. Damien got through after a tense 5-minute verification process that included confirming his employee ID, his manager's name, and the last 4 projects he'd worked on. "What's happening?" he asked the guard who finally waved him through. "Investor Summit Prep. Miss Laurent's orders. No unauthorized personnel anywhere near the upper floors today." Damien made it to the 23rd floor and found Marcus waiting by his desk, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "Conference room. Now." They ended up in the same glass-walled room where they'd discussed the back door yesterday. Marcus closed the door, pulled the privacy blinds, and turned to face Damien with an expression that was half angry, half terrified. "What did you do?" "What are you talking about?" "Andrea Cross called me at 5 a.m. Said there was suspicious network activity tied to your user credentials. Unauthorized access attempts, data mining, system probes. She wanted to know if you'd gone rogue." Damien's stomach dropped. They'd caught his program. Somehow, despite running it off network, they'd traced it back to him. "I was investigating," Damien said, "trying to figure out who planted the back door." "And did you find anything?" "Yeah. The code was added by someone with executive access. The signature points to one of 3 people, Voss, Park, or Brennan." Marcus went pale. "You're telling me one of the company founders is sabotaging the defense contract?" "I'm telling you the evidence points there. I don't know which one or why, but stop." Marcus held up his hand. "Just stop. Do you have any idea what you've done? Accusing executives of corporate sabotage without proof? They're going to crucify you. I have proof. I can show you." "It doesn't matter. You violated protocol, ran unauthorized analysis programs, and now you're pointing fingers at people who could buy and sell this entire building. Even if you're right, you're going to get destroyed for how you found it." Damien felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. "So I should have just ignored it? Let them sign the contract and hope for the best? You should have trusted the process. Let the people with authority handle it." "I tried that. Celeste Laurent told me I was wrong and sent me back to my desk." Marcus rubbed his face, looking exhausted. "I can't protect you from this. Andrea wants you in her office in 20 minutes. Security oversight will be there. Probably legal, too. They're going to ask you to explain yourself, and whatever you say better be airtight because they're looking for a reason to fire you." "Great. Perfect. That's just what I need right now, Sati." "Damien, I'm serious. If you can't prove what you're saying, they're going to make an example out of you. And if you can prove it, you're going to make enemies that will follow you for the rest of your career." Damien thought about Emma, waiting for him at home after school today. Thought about the medical bills still sitting in a drawer because he couldn't afford to look at them. Thought about the security deposit on their apartment that he'd borrowed from his sister and still hadn't paid back. Then he thought about power grids failing, about hospitals going dark, about people dying because he'd been too afraid to push back when it mattered. "Set up the meeting," Damien said. The 41st floor conference room was colder than Damien remembered. Andrea Cross sat at the head of the table, flanked by Daniel Park, and a woman Damien didn't recognize, probably legal. Marcus stood near the door like he was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. "Mr. Carter," Andrea began, "you've put us in a difficult position." "I was doing my job." "Your job is to analyze systems we assign you, not to conduct unauthorized investigations into executive personnel. My job is to protect the company's infrastructure. That's what I was doing." Daniel Park leaned forward. "By accusing 3 senior executives of sabotage based on what exactly?" Damien pulled out his laptop, opening the encrypted partition. "Based on commit signatures, access logs, and timestamps that show the backdoor code was added during a security update 9 months ago by someone with executive credentials. The IP address traces to the 46th floor." He displayed the data on the conference room screen. Andrea studied it silently. Daniel's expression was unreadable. The legal representative took notes on her tablet without saying a word. Finally, Andrea spoke. This data could be interpreted multiple ways. Executive credentials are sometimes shared for legitimate reasons. The 46th floor has multiple workstations, and IP addresses can be spoofed. Oh? I know that, but combined with the fact that someone buried a backdoor in the contract architecture, it's worth investigating. Or, Daniel said carefully, it's worth considering that you're seeing patterns that aren't there. You're under stress, working 2 jobs, raising a child alone, dealing with financial pressure. That kind of stress affects judgment. Damien felt his jaw tighten. This isn't about my personal life. Isn't it? You found something unusual, jumped to conclusions, and now you're doubling down because you can't admit you might be wrong. I'm not wrong about the back door. Richard Voss confirmed it. Richard confirmed there was unusual code. He didn't confirm it was sabotage. There's a difference. Damien looked at Marcus, hoping for support, but Marcus was staring at his shoes. No help coming from that direction. So what happens now? Damien asked. Andrea closed her tablet. You're suspended pending internal review. 2 weeks, paid. During that time, you'll have no access to company systems, no contact with other employees, and no discussions about this matter with anyone outside this room. If the review determines you acted inappropriately, suspension becomes termination. If it determines you acted in good faith, you'll be reinstated with a formal reprimand for violating protocol. And the back door, will be investigated through proper channels. By who? The same executives whose credentials were used to plant it? Andrea's expression hardened. Mr. Carter, you're already on thin ice. I suggest you take the suspension and be grateful it's not worse. Damien wanted to argue, wanted to flip the table and make them see what was right in front of their faces. But Emma's voice echoed in his head. Are you going to get in trouble? And he realized he'd already lost this fight. They'd made up their minds before he walked into the room. Fine, he said. I'll take the suspension. Security will escort you out. Leave your badge and laptop. The walk to the elevator felt longer than it should have. People stared as he passed, whispers following him across the open floor. By tomorrow, everyone would know. The analyst who accused executives of sabotage. The single dad who cracked under pressure. The guy who thought he was smarter than he actually was. The security escort was professional but firm, making sure Damien went straight to the lobby without stopping anywhere. He surrendered his badge at the front desk, signed a document he barely read, and walked out into the San Francisco afternoon feeling like he'd just thrown away everything he'd spent 18 months building. His phone buzzed. Emma's school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 3 p.m. Perfect. Just perfect. Damien sat in his car for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what to tell Emma. Hey honey, Dad got suspended for trying to save the world. Don't worry, we'll probably be fine. That would go over great. He was still sitting there when someone knocked on his window. Richard Voss stood outside, looking significantly less composed than he had during yesterday's meeting. The CTO glanced around the parking garage, then gestured for Damien to unlock the door. We need to talk, Voss said, sliding into the passenger seat. Somewhere not here. I'm suspended. I'm not supposed to be talking to employees. I don't care. Drive. Damien started the car, pulling out of the garage and heading toward the waterfront. They didn't speak until he'd parked near a pier where tourists took photos and joggers ran past without paying attention to 2 men sitting in a 10-year-old sedan. You were right, Voss said finally, about the backdoor seat. I know I was right. Your legal team doesn't seem to care. Because Andrea doesn't know the full picture, neither does Daniel. But I do, and I need you to listen very carefully. Damien turned to face him. I'm listening. Okay. Voss pulled out his phone, opening an encrypted file that displayed financial records, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell corporations with names that meant nothing. 6 months ago, Jonathan Brennan approached me with a proposal. He said he'd found investors willing to buy into Laurent Dynamics at triple our current valuation. All we had to do was sign the defense contract and give them early access to the system architecture. Why would you do that? Because he framed it as legitimate pre-implementation partnership. Said these were defense contractors who wanted to integrate our AI with their existing systems. Made sense at the time. Voss scrolled through more records. But then I started noticing irregularities. Money moving through accounts that didn't match the investor profiles. Communication channels that bypassed our standard security protocols. By the time I realized something was wrong, Brennan had already integrated the backdoor code. Yes, Sal. So why didn't you stop him? Because he has leverage. Voss's voice was bitter. 5 years ago, I made some decisions that look very bad in hindsight. Nothing illegal, but ethically questionable. Brennan documented everything. If I expose him, he exposes me, and we both go down. He's been holding that over me for months. Damien felt sick. So you just let him sabotage the company? I tried to fix it quietly. Hired external auditors, ran security reviews, hoped someone would find it before the contract signing. But Brennan's too smart. He buried it deep enough that only someone looking for the wrong reasons would find it. Voss looked at Damien. Someone like you. Why are you telling me this now? Because the investor summit is tomorrow. Every major player in the defense industry will be here. Politicians, military officials, international buyers. And at 2 p.m., Celeste signs the contract that gives Brennan's partners access to systems controlling critical infrastructure across the country. If we don't stop him before then, people are going to die. Then tell Celeste. She won't believe me. Brennan is her oldest friend. They started this company together. She trusts him more than anyone, and he's spent months making sure I look paranoid and unstable. If I accuse him without ironclad proof, she'll side with him. What kind of proof? Voss handed Damien a USB drive. Financial records showing the offshore accounts, communication logs proving Brennan coordinated with foreign entities, and the original commit history before he tried to scrub it. Everything you need to prove he planted the back door. Damien stared at the drive. Why give this to me? Because you're already suspended. You have nothing to lose. And because you're the only person in this entire company who was brave enough to say something when everyone else was too scared to look. I got fired for being brave. No, you got suspended. There's a difference. Take that drive, figure out how to use it, and stop Brennan before tomorrow afternoon. Voss opened the car door. I can't help you directly. But if you need access to anything, if you need verification, call this number. He handed Damien a card with nothing but a phone number written on it. That's my personal line, not traceable to company systems. Voss, wait. If Brennan finds out you gave me this, then I'm finished anyway. At least this way, maybe the contract doesn't kill anyone. He left before Damien could respond, walking away across the pier like a man who just transferred a bomb to someone else and was relieved to be rid of the weight. Damien sat in his car, holding the USB drive, trying to process what had just happened. He'd been suspended, given evidence of corporate sabotage by the CTO, and told to save the company in less than 24 hours. This was insane. This was way beyond anything he was qualified to handle. His phone buzzed. Emma, when are you coming home? Right, Emma. School. Normal life. The things that mattered more than corporate conspiracies and defense contracts. He texted back, on my way now. Want pizza for dinner? Yes! Extra cheese. Damien plugged the USB drive into his laptop, copying the files to his encrypted partition before heading home. He'd figure out what to do with Voss's evidence tonight, after Emma was asleep. For now, he needed to be her father, not some corporate whistleblower trying to stop a conspiracy he barely understood. But as he drove through San Francisco traffic, passing the glass towers where people with real power made decisions that affected millions of lives, Damien couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. Emma was waiting on the front steps when he got home, backpack beside her, book in her lap. She looked up as Damien pulled into the driveway and her face immediately fell. You got fired. Suspended. It's different. But you're not working. Not for 2 weeks. What? Emma followed him inside, quieter than usual. Damien ordered pizza, tried to act normal, asked about her day at school. She answered in short sentences, clearly distracted. Finally, while they were eating at the kitchen table, she put down her slice and looked at him directly. Is it because of the thing you found? Damien sighed. Yeah. The thing you told people about, but they didn't believe you? That's the one. So you were right, and they fired you anyway? Suspended. And it's complicated. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain. She wasn't wrong. Damien put down his own pizza. Okay, here's the truth. I found something bad at work. I told people about it. They didn't want to believe me because fixing it would be expensive and embarrassing. So they're pretending I'm wrong and sending me home so I'll stop making trouble. That's not fair. No, it's not. So what are you going to do? That was the question everyone kept asking, like Damien had some brilliant plan hidden up his sleeve. But he didn't. He was a low-level analyst with a suspended badge, no access to company systems, and evidence that proved his boss's best friend was sabotaging a billion-dollar defense contract. What exactly was he supposed to do with that? I don't know yet, he admitted. Emma finished her pizza in silence. Then, as Damien was cleaning up, she said, "My teacher told us about this guy named Edward Snowden. He found something bad and told everyone, even though he knew he'd get in trouble. Is that what you're doing?" Damien froze. Where did you hear about Edward Snowden? Social studies. We're learning about people who did brave things. Bam, tubo, tuat das mayonnaise. Of course they were. Because apparently 7-year-olds studied whistleblowers now, which meant Emma was drawing direct parallels between her father's situation and someone who'd ended up exiled in Russia. I'm not Edward Snowden, Em, but you're doing something brave. I'm doing something stupid. Those are sometimes the same thing. Damien couldn't help but laugh. Where do you get this stuff? Books. You should try reading them. He sent her to bed at 8, then sat down with his laptop and Voss's USB drive. The files were extensive. Spreadsheets tracking financial transfers, communication logs showing encrypted messages between Brennan and accounts registered in countries with no extradition treaties, and technical documentation proving Brennan had deliberately inserted the backdoor code during a routine security update. It was damning. It was comprehensive. And it was completely useless if Damien couldn't get it in front of someone with the authority to act. He spent 2 hours reading through everything, taking notes, trying to build a timeline. The conspiracy went back almost a year. Brennan had been planning this since before the defense contract was even finalized. He'd positioned himself perfectly. Trusted CFO, original founder, Celeste Laurent's closest advisor. No one would suspect him until it was too late. The investor summit started at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The contract signing was scheduled for 2 p.m. That gave Damien less than 20 hours to figure out how to stop it. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Damien almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Carter? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. This is Rebecca Torres from TechWatch Journal. I understand you were recently suspended from Laurent Dynamics for discovering irregularities in their defense contract. I'd like to talk to you about that. Damien's blood went cold. How did you get this number? I have sources inside the company. Sources who are concerned about what's happening with the contract signing. They suggested I contact you. I'm not talking to press. Even if it means the truth comes out? Even if it means stopping a contract that could compromise national security? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I don't know what you're... And you know that going through official channels didn't work. Your executives shut you down. But if the story goes public before the signing, they can't ignore it anymore. Itges, metes. Damien hung up. His hands were shaking. Someone inside Laurent Dynamics was leaking to journalists. Someone wanted this story public. And they were using him as the source. He needed to think. Needed to figure out who he could trust. But everyone with authority had already proven they didn't want to hear what he had to say. Except maybe one person. Damien pulled up Laurent Dynamics' public directory, searching for contact information. Celeste Laurent's office line, her executive assistant, her official email, all monitored, all filtered. Nothing would get through directly. But then he remembered something Marcus had mentioned months ago, back when Damien first started. Celeste Laurent had a personal habit of arriving early on summit days, walking the building alone before everyone else showed up. She liked the quiet, liked seeing the company when it was just empty floors and potential. If Damien could get into the building tomorrow morning before security locked it down, before the summit started, maybe he could intercept her, show her the evidence, make her see what Brennan was doing before it was too late. It was a terrible plan. He'd been suspended. His badge was deactivated. Security would throw him out the moment he showed up. But it was the only plan he had. Damien set his alarm for 4 a.m., then tried to sleep. His mind wouldn't stop racing, running through scenarios, imagining everything that could go wrong. Around midnight, he heard Emma's door open. Small footsteps padded down the hall. She appeared in his doorway, dragging her blanket. "Can't sleep?" "Me neither." She climbed onto the couch next to him. "Are you scared?" Damien thought about lying, giving her some reassuring parent answer about how everything would be fine. But Emma deserved better than that. "Yeah," he said. "I'm scared." "Me too." "You don't have anything to be scared of." "I'm scared you're going to get hurt trying to do the right thing. Like those people in my social studies book. They did brave things, and bad stuff happened to them." Damien pulled her close. "Bad stuff might happen, but if I don't try, worse stuff could happen to a lot of people." "I know." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you anyway." "Even if I mess everything up?" "Especially then, because at least you tried." They fell asleep on the couch. Damien's laptop still open on the coffee table, the USB drive sitting next to it like a ticking bomb. Tomorrow would either vindicate everything he'd risked or prove he'd destroyed his life for nothing. Either way, at least he'd tried. The alarm went off at 4 a.m. Damien woke up stiff, Emma still curled against his shoulder. He moved carefully, trying not to wake her, but she stirred anyway. "Is it morning already?" "Go back to bed. I'll be back before you wake up." "Be careful." "I will." He grabbed the USB drive, his laptop, and the printed copies of Voss's financial records. Then he drove through empty San Francisco streets toward Laurent Dynamics, rehearsing what he'd say when he saw Celeste Laurent. Assuming he got that far. Assuming security didn't tackle him in the lobby. The building's underground parking was nearly empty at 4:47 a.m. A few cars scattered across multiple levels, probably belonging to cleaning crews or early arriving caterers for the summit. Damien parked in his old spot, then took the elevator to the main lobby. The badge scanners were active, but the security desk was unmanned. Someone had left coffee sitting there, still steaming. Damien tried his deactivated badge anyway, just to see what would happen. Nothing. Red light. Access denied. He stood there trying to figure out his next move when someone spoke behind him. "You know you're not supposed to be here." Damien turned. Andrea Cross stood near the elevator bank, holding her own coffee, looking like she'd been here for hours already. "I need to talk to Celeste Laurent," Damien said. "She's not here yet, and even if she was, you're suspended. Security will remove you if you don't leave voluntarily." "Andrea, please. I have proof about the back door. Real proof. Jonathan Brennan planted it deliberately. He's working with foreign investors who want access to military infrastructure. Mr. Carter, just looked at this." Damien held up the USB drive. 5 minutes. That's all I need. Look at the evidence and then decide if I'm crazy. Andrea hesitated. For a moment, Damien thought she might actually listen, but then her expression hardened. "I'm calling security. Don't, please. People are going to get hurt if we sign that contract." "That's not your decision to make." She pulled out her phone. Damien backed toward the door, knowing he'd lost. But before Andrea could dial, the elevator doors opened. Celeste Laurent stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase, looking like she'd already been awake for hours. She saw Damien and Andrea, immediately assess the situation, and her expression turned ice cold. "What is he doing here?" "Miss Laurent, I was just about to call security. I need to talk to you," Damien interrupted. "About Jonathan Brennan and the defense contract." Celeste's jaw tightened. "Mr. Carter, you were suspended. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Brennan planted the back door. I have proof. Financial records, communication logs, everything. You have paranoid conspiracy theories and a suspended badge. Then why won't you look at the evidence?" "Because I don't have time for this." Celeste turned to Andrea. "Get him out of here." "Wait." Damien held up the USB drive. "Just look at this. Please. If I'm wrong, you can arrest me, fire me, whatever. But if I'm right and you don't look, you're signing a contract that gives foreign entities access to military defense systems." Celeste stopped. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Doubt, maybe, or just exhaustion from too many sleepless nights preparing for this summit. Then the ice returned. "You have 5 minutes. My office. If this is a waste of time, security will escort you out in handcuffs. Andrea looked like she wanted to argue, but Celeste was already walking toward the elevator. Damien followed, clutching the USB drive like a lifeline, knowing that the next 5 minutes would determine everything. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like descending into deep water. Damien stood next to Celeste Laurent, acutely aware that Andrea Cross was positioned between him and the door like she expected him to bolt. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the soft, mechanical hum of the elevator ascending through the empty building. When the doors opened, Celeste walked directly to her office without looking back. Damien followed, his laptop bag heavy against his shoulder, the USB drive sweating in his palm. This was it. 5 minutes to convince the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley that her oldest friend was betraying her, or security would drag him out, and he'd lose everything. Celeste's office looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. The massive windows showed the city still asleep, streetlights reflecting off glass towers, the bay invisible in the distance. She didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the desk lamp, which cast long shadows across the minimalist furniture. "You have 5 minutes," Celeste said, sitting behind her desk. "Start talking." Damien plugged the USB drive into his laptop, pulling up the financial records Voss had given him. His hands were shaking badly enough that he had to try twice before the connection worked. 9 months ago, Jonathan Brennan was approached by investors claiming to be defense contractors interested in early integration with your AI system. He accepted their proposal without running it through standard vetting procedures. The money came from shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Singapore. None of them have legitimate business operations. He turned the laptop so Celeste could see the spreadsheet tracking wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving through accounts that existed only on paper, funneling into subsidiary companies that Brennan controlled through proxies. Celeste's expression didn't change. "Jonathan handles international investment regularly. This doesn't prove anything except that you don't understand how global finance works. Then explain this." Damien pulled up the communication logs. Encrypted messages between Brennan's personal email and accounts registered to known corporate espionage networks. Technical specifications for the defense contract architecture being shared months before the deal was finalized. References to access windows and extraction protocols that had nothing to do with legitimate business. Andrea moved closer, reading over Celeste's shoulder. Her face went pale. "These are encrypted channels," Andrea said quietly. "How did you get access to Jonathan's private communications?" "Richard Voss gave them to me. He's been investigating Brennan for months, but couldn't come forward because Brennan has leverage over him. Voss knew if he accused Brennan directly, it would look like internal politics. But the evidence is real." Celeste scrolled through the logs, her face completely unreadable. Damien couldn't tell if she was processing the information or just looking for reasons to dismiss it. The clock on her desk showed 3 a.m. Summit prep started at 7. Contract signing at 2. Time was running out fast. "This could be fabricated," Celeste said finally. "Voss has been acting erratic for months. If he wanted to undermine Jonathan, this is exactly the kind of thing he'd create. Then verify it yourself. Check Brennan's financial records. Run your own audit of his communications. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look before you sign that contract. We've run 6 audits. Federal regulators approved every section because they didn't know what to look for. The back door is hidden inside legitimate code. It looks like standard federal oversight protocols. But once the system goes live, anyone with the right credentials can access military-level data without leaving traces. Power grids, communication networks, infrastructure systems across the country. Everything your AI is supposed to protect becomes exposed. Celeste stood walking to the window. The sky was starting to lighten, turning from black to deep blue. Somewhere in the building below, catering staff and event coordinators were probably setting up for the summit. Hundreds of people coming together to celebrate Laurent Dynamics' transformation into a defense industry giant. And Celeste Laurent, the woman who'd built this empire from nothing, was being told her closest friend had sabotaged everything. "Why would he do this?" she asked without turning around. "Money, control. Maybe he got in over his head with the wrong people and couldn't get out. I don't know his reasons. But the evidence shows what he did. Jonathan and I started this company in my parents' garage. We had nothing. No funding, no connections, just an idea and enough arrogance to think we could compete with established tech giants. He's been beside me through every failure, every success, every impossible decision. And you're asking me to believe he's been planning to destroy everything we built? Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Not much, barely noticeable, but enough that Damien realized this wasn't just about business. This was personal. Brennan wasn't just her CFO. He was family. I know what I'm asking, Damien said quietly. But if I'm right and you ignore this, people are going to die. Not in some abstract way. Real people. Hospital systems failing, traffic grids collapsing, emergency services going dark. That's what happens when infrastructure security gets compromised. Celeste turned back to face him. Her expression was still controlled, still cold, but something had shifted behind her eyes. If I investigate Jonathan and you're wrong, I destroy a friendship that's kept this company alive for 10 years. I create internal chaos right before the most important deal of my career. And I prove to every investor in that summit hall that I don't trust my own team. And if you don't investigate, and I'm right, you hand foreign entities the keys to critical systems that millions of people depend on. Which risk sounds worse? Mum. Andrea cleared her throat. Celeste, we can run a quiet audit. Limited scope, just Jonathan's recent activities. If Carter's wrong, no one needs to know we checked. But if he's right, we have 8 hours to stop a contract signing that took 4 years to negotiate. Celeste looked at Damien. You understand that even showing me this makes you a target? If Brennan finds out you have this evidence, he'll come after you with everything he has. I'm already suspended and probably getting fired. What else can he do? You'd be surprised. Celeste picked up her phone, dialing a number from memory. Richard, it's Celeste. I need you in my office right now. Yes, I know it's early. Just get here. She hung up, then looked at Andrea. Find Daniel Park. Tell him we're running an emergency security audit of executive financial records. Jonathan's account specifically. I want access logs, communication records, and every wire transfer he's authorized in the last year. That's going to require board approval. I am the board. Get it done. Andrea left quickly. Damien stood awkwardly near the desk, unsure what to do now. Celeste sat back down, scrolling through more of the evidence on his laptop, her expression unreadable. My daughter told me I should tell someone even if it was scary, Damien said, breaking the silence. She's 7, learns about whistleblowers and social studies. She asked me if I was like Edward Snowden. Are you? I'm a single dad who found something wrong and didn't know how to shut up about it. That's not exactly the same thing. No, it's harder. Snowden had ideology. You just have a kid depending on you and a conscience that won't let you ignore what you saw. Celeste closed the laptop. I built this company because I was tired of watching men with mediocre ideas get funding, while brilliant women got told their concepts weren't viable. I wanted to prove that intelligence and determination mattered more than connections and privilege. But somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to the people trying to warn me when things went wrong. I became exactly what I hated. You listened to me eventually, because you broke into my building at 5 in the morning and refused to leave. That's not the same as listening. Richard Voss arrived 17 minutes later, looking like he'd thrown on clothes in the dark and run the whole way. He stopped short when he saw Damien standing in Celeste's office. You gave him the files, Celeste said. Not a question. Voss nodded. I couldn't sit on them anymore. Brennan's moving money today. Once the contract is signed, those offshore accounts disappear and we lose any chance of proving what he did. Why didn't you come to me directly? Because I thought you wouldn't believe me. We've been at odds for months. You've made it clear you think I'm paranoid and unstable. If I accuse Jonathan without external verification, you'd assume I was trying to undermine him for political reasons. Celeste was quiet for a long moment. You're not wrong. I probably would have dismissed you. That's on me. She turned to Damien. Mr. Carter, you're officially reinstated as of right now. Full access, full authority to investigate this situation alongside Richard and Andrea. If you find proof that Jonathan planted that backdoor deliberately, I want to know before the summit starts. And if we don't find proof, Then we proceed as planned, and I owe you an apology for doubting you. She stood, gathering her briefcase. But if you do find proof, I need options. Ways to stop the signing without causing a panic that crashes our stock price and destroys investor confidence. Can you do that? Damien thought about Emma, still asleep at home. Thought about the parent-teacher conference he was supposed to attend this afternoon. Thought about how completely unprepared he was to handle corporate espionage at the executive level. I'll figure something out, he said. The next 3 hours were a blur of security audits, financial records, and encrypted communication logs. Damien worked from a secure conference room on the 46th floor, with Voss and Andrea coordinating different aspects of the investigation. Daniel Park joined them around 7, bringing access codes for Brennan's executive accounts. What they found was worse than Damien had expected. Brennan hadn't just planted the back door. He'd been systematically funneling money out of Laurent Dynamics for 18 months, using the defense contract negotiations as cover for his activities. The offshore accounts contained over $400 million that should have been company assets. He'd been selling technical specifications to competitors, sharing proprietary research with foreign entities, and setting up a network of shell corporations designed to survive even if Laurent Dynamics collapsed. He's planning to let the company fail, Voss said, staring at the financial projections on screen. Once the backdoor is discovered and the contract falls apart, our stock price crashes. Brennan's positioned to buy back controlling shares for pennies through these subsidiaries. He ends up owning Laurent Dynamics for a fraction of what it's worth. That's not just sabotage, Andrea said. That's calculated corporate murder. Damien scrolled through communication logs, finding messages between Brennan and accounts registered to known cyber warfare specialists. It's worse than that. He's not just planning to crash the company. He's planning to let the AI system fail catastrophically. Power grids, communication networks, transportation systems. If enough infrastructure collapses at once, the government will blame Laurent Dynamics for the failure. We get buried under lawsuits and regulatory investigations while Brennan walks away clean. Daniel Park looked sick. How many people would die in a coordinated infrastructure failure? Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. If hospitals lose power, traffic systems fail, emergency services can't coordinate. This isn't about money anymore. This is terrorism dressed up as corporate espionage. Andrea stood abruptly. We need to call federal authorities, FBI, Homeland Security, whoever handles this kind of thing. This is beyond our scope. And say what? Voss asked. That our CFO is planning domestic terrorism, but we need 12 hours to verify it before making accusations? They'll shut down the summit, freeze all our assets, and launch a full investigation that destroys the company, whether Brennan's guilty or not. So what do we do? Damien checked the time. 9:47 a.m. The summit floor was filling with guests. Investors, politicians, military officials, all gathering in the massive conference hall 40 floors below. In 4 hours, Celeste would stand at a podium and sign the contract that gave Brennan's partners everything they needed. We need to catch him in the act, Damien said. Let him think everything's going according to plan, then expose him publicly before he can destroy the evidence. You're talking about turning the contract signing into a trap. I'm talking about using Brennan's own plan against him. He wants a spectacle? We give him one. But instead of Celeste signing away national security, we show everyone exactly what he's been doing. Andrea shook her head. That's insane. If we do that on live cameras with hundreds of witnesses, we either prove Brennan's guilt conclusively, or we look like paranoid conspiracy theorists destroying our own company. Yeah, Damien said, but at least people will be paying attention. Celeste arrived at the conference room just after 10, looking exhausted but determined. She'd spent the last 2 hours greeting investors, doing media interviews, and pretending everything was perfectly normal. Now she closed the door behind her and leaned against it like she'd been holding herself together by force of will alone. Tell me you found something, she said. They laid it out for her. The offshore accounts, the communication with foreign entities, the financial projections showing how Brennan planned to profit from Laurent Dynamics' collapse. With every piece of evidence, Celeste's expression grew harder, colder, until she looked like something carved from ice. How long has this been happening? 18 months, Voss said. Maybe longer. He covered his tracks carefully. And I didn't notice. I was so focused on the defense contract, on proving we could compete with established defense contractors, that I didn't see my partner bleeding the company dry right in front of me. He's been your friend for years, Damien said. You trusted him. That's not a weakness. It is when that trust gets people killed. Celeste straightened, the exhaustion dropping away like a costume she'd decided to stop wearing. What's the plan? Damien explained his idea. Let the summit proceed normally. Let Brennan think he'd won. Then, during the contract signing ceremony, reveal everything publicly. Show the evidence on the massive display screens that were set up for the presentation. Make it impossible for Brennan to run or destroy the records before federal authorities could act. That's incredibly risky, Celeste said. If we're wrong, if there's any doubt about the evidence, we destroy our credibility in front of every major investor in the industry. If we're right and we don't act, Brennan triggers an infrastructure collapse that makes us complicit in domestic terrorism. Which risk sounds better? Poubes. Celeste smiled grimly. You're learning. All right, we do this, but I need you in that hall during the signing. Richard will coordinate technical access to the display systems. Andrea handles legal containment in case Brennan tries to flee. Daniel manages security to make sure no one leaves once we start revealing evidence. What about Brennan himself? Voss asked. He's going to be on stage with you during the signing. Voss, let him. I want him right there where everyone can see his face when we show what he's done. Celeste pulled out her phone. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for noon. We present the evidence to directors before the signing so they're prepared. Then we move forward. Celeste, Andrea said carefully, if this goes wrong, you lose everything. The company, your reputation, probably legal immunity depending on how prosecutors interpret your involvement. Are you sure? I'm sure that if I let this contract get signed, people die and Laurent Dynamics becomes a weapon instead of a shield. So yeah, I'm sure. She left to prepare for the board meeting. Damien sat back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. He'd been awake for over 30 hours. His entire body ached. Emma was probably up by now, wondering where he was, why he hadn't come home last night. He texted her. Still at work. Going to be late. Mrs. Patterson will pick you up from school. Love you. The response came back immediately. Are you okay? Damien stared at his phone, not sure how to answer that. Was he okay? He was about to publicly accuse a billionaire CFO of corporate sabotage and planned terrorism in front of hundreds of witnesses. If he was right, he'd probably still lose his job eventually. If he was wrong, he'd definitely never work in tech again. I think so, he finally texted back. Tell you tonight. Be careful, Dad. Always am. That was a lie, but it was the kind of lie parents told children to keep them from worrying. The kind Damien's own father had told him right up until the day he left and never came back. But Damien wasn't leaving. He was staying and fighting even though he had no idea how to win. The board meeting was brutal. 10 directors sitting around a conference table while Celeste and Voss presented evidence of Brennan's activities. Half of them immediately accused Voss of fabricating records to cover his own mistakes. The other half demanded they call federal authorities immediately and halt the summit. We're not halting, Celeste said firmly. If we do that, Brennan knows we're onto him. He destroys evidence, flees the country, and we never prove what he did. Worse, the defense contract collapses and we still get blamed for the failure without being able to explain why. So instead, you want to turn a major investor summit into a public trial. One director demanded, do you have any idea what that does to our credibility? Well, less damage than letting a terrorist attack happen on our technology. You don't know that's what he's planning. I know enough to stop him before we find out for sure. The vote was close. 6 directors sided with Celeste. 4 demanded they follow standard protocol and involve federal authorities. But 6 was enough. The plan would move forward. Damien spent the next hour coordinating with the technical team to gain access to the summit presentation systems. The display screens were controlled from a central booth overlooking the conference hall, normally operated by Laurent Dynamics' media team. Damien would need to override their controls during the signing ceremony and upload his evidence files without anyone noticing until it was too late to stop. Voss set up the override codes while Damien prepared the presentation files. Financial records, communication logs, technical documentation of the backdoor code. Everything compressed into a format that could be displayed on screens designed for promotional videos and corporate messaging. "This is going to be ugly," Voss said. "Even if we're right, even if we prove everything, there's going to be fallout. Investors will panic. Stock price will crash. We'll face lawsuits, investigations, probably criminal charges for not reporting this sooner. Better than the alternative." "Yeah, doesn't make it less ugly, though." By noon, the summit hall was completely full. Damien watched from the technical booth as hundreds of people filled the seats below. Investors in expensive suits, military officials in dress uniforms, politicians with their security details, journalists with cameras and recording equipment. The stage was set up with a massive podium, 2 signing tables, and display screens that currently showed the Laurent Dynamics logo rotating slowly. Brennan was on stage already, talking with someone from the Defense Department. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who'd already won and was just waiting for the official announcement. He had no idea that 5 floors above him, Damien Carter was preparing to destroy everything he'd built. Celeste appeared at 1:45 p.m., walking onto stage to applause. She'd changed into a different suit, something sharper and more formal, the kind of outfit you wore when you knew cameras would be recording every moment. She shook hands with the Defense Department representative, smiled at investors in the front row, and took her position at the podium. Damien's phone buzzed. "Andrea, security in position. No one leaves once presentation starts." Another message from Voss. "Override codes confirmed. You have full control of display systems." A third message from Daniel Park. "Federal agents standing by outside. Once you reveal evidence, they'll move in." Everything was ready. Now Damien just had to wait for the right moment. Celeste began her speech at exactly 2 p.m. She talked about innovation, about protecting critical infrastructure, about Laurent Dynamics' commitment to national security. Her voice was steady, confident, the ice queen of Silicon Valley addressing her empire. But Damien noticed small tells, the way she gripped the podium slightly too tight, the brief pause before certain words, the way her eyes kept scanning the crowd like she was looking for threats. Brennan sat at the signing table, waiting. He checked his watch once, smiled at something a nearby investor said, completely at ease. Celeste's speech was supposed to last 20 minutes before the actual signing. She'd memorized it weeks ago, practiced it until every word flowed naturally. But now she deviated from the script. "Before we sign this contract," Celeste said, her voice cutting through the applause, "I want to talk about trust, about the foundation that makes these partnerships possible. Because without trust, without integrity, no amount of technology can protect the systems we depend on." Brennan's expression shifted slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a small tightening around his eyes. He sensed something was wrong. Celeste looked directly at him. "Jonathan, would you join me at the podium, please?" Brennan stood smoothly, still smiling, walking to join Celeste like this was part of the planned ceremony. But Damien saw his hand move to his phone, subtle, probably sending some kind of alert to his partners. Too late. Damien activated the override codes, shutting down the media team's controls. The Laurent Dynamics logo disappeared from the display screens, replaced by the first financial record. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, shell corporations registered in countries with no extradition treaties. Millions of dollars moving through networks designed to hide their origin. The conference hall went silent. Everyone was staring at the screens, trying to understand what they were seeing. "These are Jonathan Brennan's financial records from the last 18 months, Celeste said, her voice steady despite what must have been absolute terror. "They show systematic theft of company assets, communication with foreign entities known for corporate espionage, and deliberate sabotage of the defense contract we're here to sign today." Brennan's smile disappeared. "Celeste, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done months ago, listening to the people who tried to warn me." Damien cycled through the evidence files. Communication logs showing Brennan coordinating with cyber warfare specialists. Technical documentation proving he'd planted the backdoor code. Financial projections showing how he planned to profit from Laurent Dynamics' collapse. "This is insane," Brennan said, his voice loud enough to reach the first few rows. "These records are fabricated. Someone is trying to sabotage this deal. The someone is you, Jonathan." Celeste's voice was cold now, completely emotionless. "You've been planning this for over a year, bleeding the company dry, selling our technology to foreign competitors, setting up a network designed to let you profit when everything collapses. Brennan turned to the audience, appealing directly to investors. Brennan turned to the zone. She's having a breakdown. The pressure of this deal, the stress of the last few months. This is paranoid conspiracy thinking. Then explain the $400 million in offshore accounts registered to shell corporations you control, Celeste interrupted. Explain the communication log showing you shared classified defense specifications with entities on federal watch lists. Explain the backdoor code in our AI system that matches your personal commit signatures. Security was moving toward the stage now. Federal agents were entering through the side doors, just as Daniel had promised. Brennan saw them coming, and his expression changed from indignant to calculating in a fraction of a second. He ran, not toward the exits, which were already being blocked. Instead, he ran toward the emergency stairs at the back of the stage. Daniel Park tried to intercept him, but Brennan shoved him aside, surprisingly strong for someone who spent most of his time behind a desk. Damien didn't think. He just moved. He left the technical booth, running down 5 flights of stairs, taking them 2 at a time. His phone was buzzing constantly. Andrea trying to coordinate security, Voss asking what was happening, Celeste demanding updates. He ignored all of it, focused only on reaching the 41st floor before Brennan disappeared into the building's maze of corridors. He burst through the stairwell door just as Brennan reached the executive wing. The CFO was fast, motivated by pure survival instinct, heading toward his private office where he probably had escape plans prepared. Damien ran after him, his lungs burning, legs threatening to give out from exhaustion and adrenaline. "Brennan, stop!" Brennan didn't stop. He reached his office, slammed the door behind him. Damien hit it shoulder first, the impact sending pain shooting through his entire arm. The door held, locked from inside. Security arrived seconds later, 3 officers with Daniel Park leading them. They didn't bother with the door, just kicked it open, the lock shattering. Inside, Brennan was at his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "He's deleting files," Damien said. "Stop him!" But Brennan wasn't deleting files, he was activating something. The computer screen showed a command line interface, code scrolling faster than Damien could read. Then all at once, the building's lights flickered. "What did you just do?" Daniel demanded. Brennan smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Insurance policy. If I go down, Laurent Dynamics goes down with me. I just activated the backdoor code remotely. In about 30 minutes, your precious AI system starts sending corrupted data to every defense network it's connected to. Power grids, communication systems, infrastructure controls, all of it compromised. All of it pointing back to Celeste's technology as the source of failure." Damien felt cold. "You can't do that. The contract isn't even signed yet. The system isn't fully deployed. Beta testing has been running for 2 weeks. Didn't Celeste tell you? We needed real-world data before the official signing, so the AI is already active, already integrated with federal systems. And in 28 minutes, it's going to fail catastrophically." Daniel grabbed Brennan, pulling him away from the computer. "How do we stop it?" You can't. Kill codes are stored off-site, accessible only through credentials that exist in 3 different countries. By the time you coordinate with international authorities, the damage will be done. Damien stared at the computer screen, at the code still scrolling past. His mind was racing, running through possibilities. The backdoor code, the authentication bypass, the way Brennan had hidden it inside legitimate system architecture. If the system was already active, if the corrupted data was already being fed into defense networks, then they needed to shut down the AI completely before it finished its propagation cycle. "Okay, can we pull the plug?" Damien asked. "Just physically disconnect the servers?" "Distributed architecture," Voss said, appearing in the doorway. He must have followed Damien down from the summit hall. The AI runs across 12 different data centers in 6 states. You'd need to coordinate simultaneous shutdowns, and even then, the backup systems would reactivate within minutes. Then we don't shut it down. We isolate it. Damien turned to Voss. The defense networks it's connected to, they all route through central authentication servers, right? If we block the AI's access at the authentication level, it can't send corrupted data to anything. That requires federal authorization, multiple agencies, all of them needing to approve. or one person with executive override codes. Damien looked at Brennan. You built this system. You know the back doors. Give us the authentication kill switch. Brennan laughed.
Why would I do that?
Because right now you're looking at corporate sabotage and theft charges. Bad, but survivable with expensive lawyers. But if thousands of people die because infrastructure systems fail, you're looking at domestic terrorism. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. Is that really worth protecting your offshore accounts? Brennan's smile faded. For the first time, he looked uncertain. The kill switch, Damien repeated. Now, 23 minutes later, Damien was back in the technical booth overlooking the summit hall, fingers flying across the keyboard as he entered authentication codes that should never have existed. Voss was on a conference call with federal agencies, explaining what was happening, coordinating the isolation protocols. Andrea was dealing with investors who'd watched their billion-dollar deal explode into accusations of terrorism and were now threatening lawsuits against everyone involved. And Celeste was on stage, still standing at the podium, explaining to hundreds of confused and angry people that she'd just stopped a conspiracy that could have crashed critical infrastructure across the country. Damien entered the final kill code. On his screen, connection after connection dropped as the AI system was systematically isolated from every defense network it had been integrated with. No more data exchange. No more access to power grids or communication systems. Just a sophisticated program locked inside its own servers, harmless. His phone buzzed. Emma, are you coming to my parent-teacher conference? It's at 3. Damien checked the time. 3:17 p.m. He'd missed it. Again.
I'm so sorry, Em. Work emergency. I'll explain tonight.
It's okay. Mrs. Patterson came instead. She said you're doing important things. Damien felt his eyes burn. Emma deserved better than a father who kept missing the moments that mattered because he was too busy saving the world from threats she'd never know existed. I love you, he texted back. Love you too, Dad. Federal agents were arresting Brennan now, leading him out of his office in handcuffs while he screamed about illegal searches and constitutional rights. Andrea followed them, already on her phone with Laurent Dynamics' legal team. Daniel Park was coordinating building security, making sure no one else connected to Brennan's conspiracy could escape. And Damien just sat in the technical booth, exhausted, watching the chaos unfold below. The summit hall was emptying out, investors leaving in confused clusters, journalists shouting questions at anyone who would listen. The contract signing that was supposed to transform Laurent Dynamics into a defense industry giant had instead become the messiest corporate scandal in recent memory. But the infrastructure systems were safe. The AI system was isolated, and people who would have died in the collapse Brennan planned were going home to their families without ever knowing how close they'd come to disaster. Celeste found him an hour later, still sitting in the booth. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the space of an afternoon. The Ice Queen mask was completely gone, replaced by someone who just looked tired and sad. They want me to make a statement, she said. Officially explain what happened. Our PR team is drafting something, but I don't think corporate language is going to fix this. Probably not. I trusted him. For 10 years, I trusted him completely, and he was planning to destroy everything we built. I'm sorry. Don't be. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. That's on me. She sat down next to him. Thank you for not giving up even when everyone told you to be quiet. Emma told me I should tell someone even if it was scary. Turns out 7-year-olds give good advice. Yeah, they do. Celeste was quiet for a moment. What happens now? To you, I mean. Damien hadn't thought that far ahead. I guess I go back to being a low-level analyst, assuming you still want me working here. I want you running cybersecurity oversight. Director level. Real authority to investigate problems before they become catastrophic. Enough salary to finally get out from under those medical bills. Damien stared at her. I don't have the qualifications for that. You have the only qualification that matters. You care more about doing the right thing than keeping your job. That's rare. I need people around me who'll tell me when I'm wrong, even if it means risking everything. You proved you're one of them. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Take some time, spend it with your daughter, then let me know.
Celeste stood, straightening her suit. I need to go face the press. Wish me luck. Good luck. Eat.
She paused at the door. Damien, your daughter sounds like an amazing kid. Yeah, she really is. After Celeste left, Damien sat alone in the technical booth, watching the empty summit hall below. Somewhere in this building, federal investigators were seizing Brennan's files, following money trails, building a case that would probably take years to fully prosecute. Andrea was managing legal fallout. Voss was coordinating damage control with investors. The cleanup would go on for months, but for Damien, right now, it was over. He packed up his laptop, gathered the files he'd printed, and took the elevator down to the lobby. Security nodded at him as he passed. Not the suspicious scrutiny of yesterday, but respectful acknowledgement. Word had spread. The analyst who'd exposed the conspiracy. The guy who'd saved the company.
Damien didn't feel like a hero. He felt like someone who'd stumbled into something way over his head and somehow managed not to drown.
His phone buzzed once more time. Emma. Mrs. Patterson says you were on the news. Are you famous now? Damien smiled, typing back as he walked to his car. Not famous, just did my job.
That's what heroes always say in books. I'm not a hero, Em. I'm just your dad.
Same thing.
Maybe she was right. Maybe being a hero wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic speeches.
Maybe it was just about showing up when it mattered and refusing to back down when everyone told you to be quiet. About teaching your kid that sometimes the right thing was also the hard thing. And you did it anyway because the alternative was worse. Damien drove home through late afternoon traffic, exhausted but finally able to breathe. When he pulled into the driveway, Emma was waiting on the front steps again, her ever-present backpack beside her. She ran to him before he even got out of the car, throwing her arms around his waist in a hug that nearly knocked him over. You're okay,
she said into his shirt.
I'm okay. Mrs. Patterson showed me the news. They said you stopped bad people from hurting a lot of other people. Something like that. Were you scared? Terrified. Emma pulled back, looking up at him with those two serious eyes.
But you did it anyway.
Yeah, I did it anyway. I'm proud of you. Damien felt something break loose in his chest, some tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He picked Emma up, even though she was getting too big for it, holding her tight while she laughed and complained that he was embarrassing her. Come on, he said finally, putting her down. Let's order pizza, extra cheese, and you can tell me about the parent-teacher conference I missed. Mrs. Patterson said my math scores are really good. Of course they are. You're brilliant. They went inside together, leaving the Laurent Dynamics chaos behind for now. Tomorrow, Damien would think about Celeste's job offer, about whether he wanted to stay at a company that had just imploded spectacularly, about how to rebuild some kind of stable life for Emma. But tonight, he was just going to be her father. Watch bad TV, eat too much pizza, and be grateful they'd both made it through another impossible day. Sometimes that was enough. The pizza arrived 40 minutes later, delivered by a kid who couldn't have been more than 19 and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Damien tipped him too much because he remembered being that age, working jobs that paid barely enough to cover gas money. Emma had already set up their TV dinner arrangement, plates on the coffee table, her homework pushed aside, her favorite show queued up and ready to play. Can we watch something else tonight? Damien asked, settling onto the couch. Like what? I don't know. Something that doesn't require thinking. Emma considered this seriously, scrolling through options. Cartoons? Perfect. They ended up watching some animated thing about talking animals trying to save their forest from developers. It was simple, predictable, and exactly what Damien needed after a day that had felt like living through someone else's action movie. Emma laughed at the jokes, ate her pizza with the kind of focus she usually reserved for difficult math problems, and didn't ask any more questions about what had happened at work. Around 8, his phone started buzzing. First Marcus, wanting to know if Damien was okay and whether he was really getting promoted. Then Andrea, checking if he'd be available for federal interviews over the next few weeks. Then a number he didn't recognize, which turned out to be a journalist from some tech publication wanting a quote about exposing corporate sabotage. Damien turned his phone off. Is everyone calling you? Emma asked. Everyone wants to talk about today. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. Then don't. Tell them you're busy with your daughter. You're 7. When did you get so smart? Emma grinned. I've always been smart.
You're just noticing now, sir.
They finished the show, then another one, and by the time Damien looked at the clock, it was past Emma's bedtime. He should have sent her to brush her teeth an hour ago. Should have enforced the schedule they tried to maintain, even when everything else was chaos. But tonight, he let it slide. Let her fall asleep against his shoulder while cartoon characters sang songs about friendship and never giving up. He carried her to bed, tucked her in the way he'd done 1,000 times before. She mumbled something about being proud of him again, already half asleep, and Damien felt that tightness in his chest return. How many nights had he come home too exhausted to really see her? How many conversations had he missed because he was too busy worrying about work, about money, about all the impossible problems that never seemed to have solutions? The Laurent Dynamics scandal would follow him for years. People would know his name, know his face. Some would call him a hero. Others would say he was a troublemaker who'd destroyed a company's reputation over paranoid conspiracy theories. The truth, as usual, was more complicated than either version. But tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Emma was safe, sleeping in her own bed, in an apartment they could still afford because Damien hadn't been too afraid to speak up when it counted. He stayed in her doorway for a few minutes, just watching her breathe. Then he went back to the living room and finally turned his phone back on. 73 missed calls, over 100 text messages, 3 voicemails from Celeste asking him to call her back when he had a chance. Damien texted her instead. Tomorrow. I need one night to just be a dad. Her response came back immediately. Take the night. Take the weekend. You've earned it. But sleep didn't come easy. Damien lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in fragments. The moment he'd shown Celeste the evidence. Brennan running from the stage. The scramble to stop the infrastructure collapse. He kept expecting someone to call and tell him it had all been a mistake, that he'd misread the data, that Brennan was innocent and Damien had just destroyed an honest man's career over bad analysis. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Voss. Federal agents found offshore accounts in 7 different countries. Total so far is over 600 million. You were right about everything. That should have made Damien feel vindicated. Instead, it just made him tired. $600 million stolen while people like him worked night shifts to pay medical bills, while families struggled to keep their power on and their kids fed. Brennan had been willing to let thousands die just to protect money he'd stolen from the company he'd helped build. Damien finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., his phone still buzzing with messages he'd read tomorrow. The weekend was strange. Damien took Emma to the park Saturday morning, and people recognized him. Not many, but enough that it was weird. A woman jogging past did a double take. A father watching his kids on the swings approached and said something about being grateful for people willing to stand up to corruption. Emma asked why strangers were talking to her dad, and Damien didn't have a good answer. You're kind of famous, Emma said on the drive home. I really don't want to be. Too late. You're on Wikipedia now. I checked. You looked me up on Wikipedia? You're my dad. I wanted to see what they said. She was quiet for a moment. They got some stuff wrong. Said you were 34, you're only 32. Probably should have fact-checked better. Can I tell my teacher what you did? Damien glanced at her. What would you tell her? That my dad found bad people doing bad things and stopped them even though he was scared. She's always saying we should stand up for what's right. I want her to know you actually did it. Yeah, okay. You can tell her. Sunday morning, Celeste called. Not texted, actually called, which meant this was serious. I know you said you needed the weekend, she began, but we've got a situation developing and I need your input. What kind of situation? The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss company restructuring. Brennan's arrest created a vacancy in the CFO position, and several board members are using it as an opportunity to push for major leadership changes. Some of them want me out. Damien sat down at his kitchen table, suddenly awake despite only having 2 hours of sleep. Can they do that? With enough votes, yes. They're arguing that my failure to detect Brennan's activities earlier shows poor judgment, that I prioritized the defense contract over internal oversight, that the company needs fresh leadership to rebuild investor confidence. That's insane. You're the one who exposed him. After you forced me to look at the evidence. If you'd gone through official channels and I'd dismissed you like I almost did, Brennan would have succeeded. The board knows that.
They're using it against me. So what do you need from me?
Testimony. The board wants to interview everyone involved in exposing Brennan. You, Voss, Andrea, Daniel. They're trying to build a timeline of who knew what and when. Your version of events could help me survive this. Or it could show that you ignored warnings and only acted when you had no choice. There was a long silence on the other end. Yes, it could show that too. Celeste, I'll tell them the truth.
I don't know how to do anything else, but I'm not going to lie to protect you if that's what you're asking.
I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to remember that sometimes context matters. You pushed me to look at evidence I didn't want to see, but once I saw it, I acted. That should count for something. It does count, but it doesn't erase the fact that you almost let the contract go through. If I hadn't broken into the building that morning, I know, believe me.
I know. She sounded exhausted. The board meeting is Monday at 10 a.m. I need you there by 9 for prep. Can you do that?
Yeah, I'll be there. Thank you. After she hung up, Damien sat at the table trying to figure out what he'd just agreed to, testifying before Laurent Dynamics' board of directors about the series of mistakes and luck that had prevented a disaster, making the case that Celeste Laurent deserved to keep running a company she'd nearly destroyed through misplaced trust. Emma wandered into the kitchen, still in her pajamas. Was that your boss? Yeah. Is she in trouble? Kind of. Because of the thing with the bad guy? Because she didn't catch the bad guy sooner. Emma poured herself cereal, thinking this over with the seriousness she brought to everything. But she caught him eventually. Doesn't that count? I don't know, maybe. You're going to tell people she did good, right? I'm going to tell people the truth, which is that she listened to you and stopped the bad thing from happening. That's doing good. Sometimes Damien forgot how simple things looked when you were 7. No complicated politics, no career considerations, just the basic question of whether someone had done the right thing when it mattered. By that standard, Celeste had. She'd been slow, she'd resisted, she'd made mistakes. But in the end, she'd acted. The question was whether that was enough. Monday morning arrived too fast. Damien dropped Emma at school, endured her worried expression as she made him promise to be careful, then drove to Laurent Dynamics feeling like he was heading towards something that would change everything regardless of how it went. The building looked different now. Same glass tower, same marble lobby, but something fundamental had shifted. Security was tighter, multiple checkpoints, ID verification at every floor, guards positioned throughout the building like they were expecting an invasion. The defense contract might have failed, but Laurent Dynamics was still a target for anyone interested in corporate espionage. Celeste met him in a conference room on the 45th floor. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, wearing a suit that was perfectly tailored but couldn't hide the exhaustion underneath. Voss was there too, along with Andrea and 2 lawyers Damien didn't recognize. Thank you for coming, Celeste said. The board wants individual interviews before the full session. You'll go last, after they've heard from Richard and Andrea. Just answer their questions honestly. Don't volunteer information they don't ask for. And remember that everything you say could end up in court proceedings if the situation escalates. No pressure, Damien muttered. One of the lawyers, a severe woman in her 50s, leaned forward. Mr. Carter, the board is going to focus on your initial report about the backdoor code. They're going to ask why you didn't follow proper channels for reporting security concerns. They're going to suggest that your suspension was justified and that Ms. Laurent only acted to avoid a lawsuit after you threatened to go public. That's not what happened. We know, but that's the narrative some board members are building. They want to paint Ms. Laurent as reactive rather than proactive. Your job is to make clear that she acted decisively once presented with verified evidence. She also told me I was wrong and sent me back to my desk the first time I brought it up. The lawyer's expression didn't change. That's not helpful. It's what happened. Celeste held up a hand. He's not going to lie for me. I already told you that. Damien tells the truth, and we deal with whatever consequences come from it. The consequence might be losing your position as CEO. Then that's what happens. But I'm not asking people to perjure themselves to save my job. Yes, The board interviews started at 10:15 a.m. Damien waited in the conference room while Voss went first, then Andrea. He tried reading news articles on his phone but couldn't focus. The tech publications were still running daily updates on the Laurent Dynamics scandal. Brennan had been formally charged with corporate fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. Federal investigators were tracing offshore accounts, following money trails that led to 3 different continents. Several of his co-conspirators had already been arrested. Others had fled to countries without extradition treaties. The damage to Laurent Dynamics' reputation was catastrophic. Stock price had dropped 40% in 3 days. Major investors were pulling funding. The Defense Department had officially terminated the AI contract and launched an investigation into how the security breach had gone undetected for so long. Industry analysts were predicting bankruptcy within 6 months unless the company found a way to rebuild credibility. And in the middle of all that chaos, the board of directors was debating whether Celeste Laurent deserved to remain CEO of the company she'd built from nothing. Andrea came back from her interview looking shaken. "They're not friendly in there. Be ready for hostile questions." "What kind of hostile?" "The kind designed to make you look like a rogue employee with a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate whistleblower. They're trying to establish that you violated company policy, that your suspension was appropriate, and that Celeste only acted to avoid legal liability after you threatened to leak information to the press." "I never threatened to leak anything." "Rebecca Torres from TechWatch Journal called you. They know that. They're going to use it to suggest you were planning to go public regardless of what Celeste did." I hung up on Torres. I didn't talk to any journalists. Doesn't matter. The call happened. That's enough for them to build a narrative. Great. Perfect. Damien was walking into a room full of wealthy board members who'd already decided he was the problem, not the solution. The conference room where the board met was even more intimidating than Celeste's office. Massive table, expensive chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the entire Bay Area spread out like a map. 10 board members sat along one side, with Celeste positioned at the far end like she was already being judged from a distance. "Mr. Carter," said a man in his 60s who introduced himself as board chairman Howard Mitchell. "Thank you for joining us. We have questions about the events leading to Jonathan Brennan's arrest." Damien sat across from them, very aware that he was the only person in the room who didn't make 7 figures annually. "I'll do my best to answer. Let's start with your initial discovery of the backdoor code. You found it during routine system analysis?" "Yes. I was tracking what I thought was a minor synchronization bug. The backdoor was hidden inside error-checking protocols. And your first action was to report it to your supervisor, Marcus Webb?" "That's correct. Who then escalated it to executive review, where Ms. Laurent dismissed your concerns and suggested you were under personal stress that affected your judgment." Damien hesitated. This was the trap. Confirmed that Celeste had dismissed him, and they'd use it to prove she'd ignored warnings. Defend her decision, and he'd be lying about what actually happened. "Miss Laurent was presented with incomplete information," Damien said carefully. "At that time, I hadn't verified whether the code was a legitimate federal oversight protocol or an unauthorized backdoor. She made a reasonable decision based on what she knew." But you believed it was unauthorized." "I believed it warranted further investigation, which Ms. Laurent prevented by suspending you. She suspended me for running unauthorized analysis programs and making accusations without sufficient proof. That was within her authority. Yet you continued investigating despite the suspension. Why?" "Because if I was right, people were going to die. I couldn't sit on that possibility." Howard Mitchell leaned back, studying Damien with an expression that gave nothing away. "Mr. Carter, you understand that from our perspective, you appear to be an employee who violated company policy, ignored direct orders from the CEO, and created a crisis that has cost this company billions in value. Why should we view your actions as heroic rather than insubordinate?" Damien felt anger flare in his chest. Because Jonathan Brennan planted code that would have given foreign entities access to military defense systems. Because he stole over $600 million from this company while planning infrastructure failures that could have killed thousands of people. And because when I brought evidence of that to Ms. Laurent's attention, she acted immediately to stop it. You're not here because I violated policy. You're here because I stopped a conspiracy that would have destroyed Laurent Dynamics completely, says, by circumventing the very oversight structures designed to prevent such conspiracies. No, by recognizing that those oversight structures had already been compromised and finding another way to expose the truth. Another board member spoke up, a woman in her 40s who'd been taking notes throughout. Ms. Laurent has testified that she only took your concerns seriously after you provided evidence from Richard Voss. Evidence that Mr. Voss obtained through what some might call illegal surveillance of a fellow executive. Do you deny coordinating with Mr. Voss to build a case against Mr. Brennan outside proper channels? I deny nothing. Voss gave me evidence that proved what I'd suspected. I brought it to Celeste. She verified it and acted. That's not conspiracy, that's due diligence. Due diligence would have been following established protocols for reporting executive misconduct. Protocols that Brennan controlled as CFO. Protocols that required reporting suspicious activity to the very people who were part of the conspiracy. If I'd followed those protocols, you wouldn't be sitting here investigating a failed sabotage attempt. You'd be sitting here explaining to federal authorities why Laurent Dynamics technology caused nationwide infrastructure collapse. Howard Mitchell held up a hand. Mr. Carter, we're not questioning your intentions. We're questioning your methods and Laurent's judgment in acting on information obtained through unauthorized means. Then question away. But while you're doing that, remember that every person in this building still has a job because I didn't wait for authorization to do the right thing. And Celeste Laurent still has a company because she had the courage to act when it mattered, even though it meant admitting she'd been wrong. The room fell silent. Damien could feel his heart pounding, could feel the weight of 10 pairs of eyes evaluating everything about him. He'd probably just talked himself out of any future at Laurent Dynamics, but he'd told the truth, and that was all Emma had ever asked him to do. Finally, Howard Mitchell spoke. Thank you, Mr. Carter. That will be all. We'll contact you if we have further questions. Damien left the conference room, legs shaking from adrenaline. Andrea was waiting outside. How bad? She asked. Pretty bad. I think I just defended Celeste by basically admitting she made terrible decisions, but eventually did the right thing anyway. That's probably the most honest assessment anyone's given them. Is that good or bad? I have no idea. The board deliberated for 3 hours. Damien spent that time in the 45th floor break room, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to check his phone every 30 seconds. Voss joined him around 1 p.m., looking equally anxious. They're going to fire her, Voss said. Mitchell's faction has enough votes. They've already lined up a replacement CEO from outside the company. Someone with defense industry experience who can rebuild relationships with federal contractors. She built this company, and she nearly destroyed it by trusting the wrong person. That's what they'll say publicly. Privately, they just want someone they can control. Celeste never let the board push her around. This is their chance to install leadership that will. That's not right. No, but it's how corporate politics work. You should know that by now. Damien's phone buzzed. Emma, texting from school. How's the meeting going? Still happening, he replied. Are you telling them the truth? Always good. Love you. At 3:47 p.m., Andrea emerged from the boardroom looking exhausted. They've reached a decision. Everyone involved needs to be present for the announcement. They gathered in the main conference room. Damien, Voss, Andrea, Daniel Park, Marcus Webb, and several other employees who'd been part of exposing the conspiracy. Celeste stood at the window, her back to the room, looking out over the city she'd spent 10 years conquering. Howard Mitchell entered with the other board members. His expression gave nothing away. After extensive deliberation, Mitchell began, the board has reached several conclusions regarding recent events. First, Jonathan Brennan's actions constituted the most serious breach of fiduciary duty in this company's history. Federal authorities will have our full cooperation in prosecuting him and his co-conspirators. Second, the failure to detect Mr.
Brennan's activities earlier represents a systemic oversight failure that must be addressed through comprehensive policy reform.
He paused, looking directly at Celeste. Third, while Ms. Laurent's judgment in initially dismissing concerns about the defense contract was problematic, her decisive action once presented with verified evidence prevented catastrophic damage. After reviewing testimony from multiple witnesses, the board has determined that Ms. Laurent should remain as CEO, subject to several conditions. Damien felt something unclench in his chest. Celeste turned from the window, her expression carefully neutral. What conditions? She asked. Creation of an independent oversight board with authority to investigate executive conduct without requiring CEO approval. Mandatory rotation of executive positions to prevent concentration of power. An immediate implementation of a whistleblower protection program that ensures employees can report concerns without fear of retaliation. Son, those are reasonable conditions. I accept them. Mitchell nodded. Additionally, the board recommends significant structural changes to company leadership. We're creating a new position, Director of Cyber Integrity, with full authority to audit all company systems and direct access to the board for reporting security concerns. Mr. Carter, we'd like to offer you that position. Damien stared at him. I'm sorry, what? What? You demonstrated exactly the kind of independent judgment we need embedded in company structure. Director level, appropriate compensation, and guaranteed protection from termination, except for cause, approved by the full board. You'd report directly to Ms. Laurent, but maintain autonomy and security oversight. I'm not qualified for a director position. You're the only person in this building who is willing to risk everything to stop a threat everyone else missed. That makes you more qualified than anyone. Damien looked at Celeste. She met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. This was real. They were actually offering him the job she'd mentioned after the summit disaster. Can I think about it? Damien asked. Take a week, Mitchell said. But we'd like an answer before next board meeting. Dismissed. Miketpul? Everyone filed out except Celeste and Damien. They stood in the empty conference room, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, both of them too exhausted to move. You didn't have to defend me, Celeste said finally. Yeah, I did. You listened when it mattered. That's worth defending. I almost didn't listen. If you hadn't broken into the building that morning, if you hadn't forced me to look at the evidence, I would have signed that contract. Everything that happened after was because you wouldn't let me ignore the truth. So what does that mean? You didn't. It means you saved my company, and maybe you saved me from becoming the kind of person who cares more about deals than people. She smiled tiredly. Take the job, Damien. Not because I'm asking, but because Laurent Dynamics needs someone who'll always tell the truth, even when it's hard. I need to talk to Emma first. This affects her too. Of course. Take your time. Damien collected his things and headed for the elevator. On the way down, he thought about everything that had changed in less than a week. He'd gone from suspended analyst to company director, from worried single dad to minor celebrity, from someone who could barely pay medical bills to someone offered a salary that would finally give Emma the stability she deserved. But underneath all that, he was still just a father trying to teach his daughter that doing the right thing mattered, even when it cost everything. Emma was waiting on the school steps when he arrived for pickup. She ran to the car, backpack bouncing, talking before she even had the door fully open. Mrs. Patterson saw you on the news again. She said you were very brave, and my teacher asked if you'd come talk to our class about standing up for what's right. Can you? Please? Maybe. We'll see. That means no. That means I need to think about it. Damien pulled out of the school parking lot. How would you feel about moving? Emma's excitement vanished. Moving where? Not far, just a better apartment, maybe a house with a yard. Somewhere you could have your own space instead of sharing the living room with my work stuff. Why would we move? Because I got offered a promotion, better job, better pay. Enough that we wouldn't have to worry about bills anymore. Emma was quiet, processing this. Would you still work night shifts? No, regular hours, home for dinner most nights. And we could stay in the same school district? Yeah, same school, same friends, just a better place to live. Okay, then yes. That's it? Just okay?
Emma shrugged. You're my dad. I trust you. If you think it's good, it probably is.
Ye. Damien felt his throat tighten. 7 years old, and she just trusted him completely, even after all the times he'd messed up, all the promises he'd broken because work got in the way. I love you, Emma. Love you too, Dad. Can we get pizza again tonight? Yeah, we can get pizza, say. They drove home through rush hour traffic, past the glass towers where people made decisions that affected millions of lives, past the neighborhoods where families like theirs struggled to make rent every month. Damien thought about the job offer, about what it meant to accept a position that came with real authority and real responsibility. He'd be the person other employees came to when they found problems. The person who had to decide what was worth fighting for and what was just corporate politics. It was a lot of pressure for someone who'd been a low-level analyst a week ago, but maybe that was exactly why he was the right person for it. He remembered what it felt like to be ignored, to bring concerns to people who didn't want to listen, to watch mistakes happen because no one with authority cared enough to look closely. He wouldn't be that person. If he took this job, he'd be the person who listened, who investigated, who didn't let fear of consequences prevent him from doing what was right. That night, after Emma was asleep, Damien sat at his kitchen table and wrote an email to Celeste Laurent, accepting the position of Director of Cyber Integrity. He kept it short, professional, just a simple confirmation that he'd take the job and start whenever she needed him. Her response came back 30 seconds later. Thank you. Report Monday. We have a lot of work to do. Damien closed his laptop and looked around the small apartment that had been home for the last 3 years. He'd brought Emma here after her mother died, after the medical bills piled up, after everything fell apart. It had been enough then. Barely, but enough. Now, they could do better. Now he could give Emma the stability and security she deserved. Not because he'd gotten lucky, but because he'd been brave enough to speak up when everyone told him to stay quiet. His phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. Damien almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Carter, this is Agent Patricia Williams, FBI. I'm handling the federal investigation into Jonathan Brennan's activities. I need to schedule a formal interview regarding your role in exposing the conspiracy. Are you available this week? And just like that, Damien was reminded that this wasn't over. The criminal investigation would take months, maybe years. He'd be testifying, answering questions, reliving everything that happened. The story wouldn't end cleanly with a promotion and a happy ending. It would drag on, complicated and messy, the way real life always was. Yeah, Damien said. I'm available, whatever you need. Check you out. Thank you. I'll send you the details. And Mr. Carter? What you did took real courage. A lot of people owe you their lives, even if they'll never know it. After she hung up, Damien sat in the dark kitchen thinking about that. Thousands of people going about their lives, completely unaware that they'd almost lost power, lost communications, lost the infrastructure systems they depended on every day. They'd never know how close they came to disaster. Never know that a single father working night shifts had stopped it because he'd been too stubborn to accept being told he was wrong. Maybe that was okay? Maybe being a hero didn't require recognition. Maybe it just required showing up and doing the right thing, even when no one would ever know you did it. Damien finally went to bed around midnight, exhausted but somehow lighter than he'd felt in months. Tomorrow he'd start figuring out logistics, finding a new apartment, negotiating the promotion details, preparing for federal interviews. But tonight, he was just a father who'd kept his daughter safe and taught her that courage mattered more than comfort. That was enough. That was everything. Monday morning felt different. Damien woke up before his alarm, made breakfast for Emma without burning the toast, and actually had time to help her find the science homework she'd misplaced over the weekend. They drove to school with music playing instead of sitting in tired silence. And when Emma got out of the car, she turned back and said something that surprised him. You look happy, Dad. Yeah? I feel pretty good today. Good. You should feel that way more often, Dad. She ran off to join her friends before Damien could respond, but the words stayed with him during the drive to Laurent Dynamics. When was the last time he'd actually felt happy instead of just getting through the day? When was the last time he'd woken up without immediately calculating how many hours until he could sleep again? The building security recognized him now, not just his badge, but his face. They nodded as he passed through, one guard even saying, "Morning, Mr. Carter," like he was someone worth acknowledging. It was strange, but not entirely unwelcome. Damien took the elevator to the 46th floor, where his new office was apparently located. Director of Cyber Integrity. The title still felt absurd. The office itself was modest compared to the executive suites, but a massive upgrade from his old cubicle. Windows overlooking the city, actual furniture instead of cheap desk chairs, space for more than just a laptop and coffee cup. Someone had already set up his computer, complete with security credentials that gave him access to systems he'd never been allowed to touch before. Celeste appeared in his doorway at 8:30 a.m., carrying 2 cups of coffee.
Figured you'd need this, she said, handing him one. First day as a director. How does it feel? Like I'm about to wake up and realize this was all a weird dream. If it helps.
I felt the same way when I became CEO. Spent the first month convinced someone would figure out I had no idea what I was doing and fire me. Did they?
Obviously not. Turned out everyone was equally confused and we all just pretended we knew what we were doing until it became true. She sat in one of his chairs, looking around the office.
I need to brief you on what's happening with the federal investigation. FBI wants full access to our systems for the next 6 months. They're treating this as a counterintelligence operation now, not just corporate fraud. Because of the foreign connections. Because Brennan wasn't working alone. They've identified at least 12 other individuals involved in the conspiracy, including 2 former NSA contractors and someone with ties to a foreign intelligence service. This wasn't just theft. It was coordinated espionage using Laurent Dynamics as the access point. Damien felt cold despite the warm coffee. How many other companies might be compromised? Months. That's what they're trying to figure out. Brennan had connections throughout the defense industry. If he planted backdoors in our systems, he probably planted them elsewhere too. The FBI is quietly investigating 6 other contractors right now. Does Emma need protection? If these people know I expose them, security detail is already arranged. Unmarked car watching your apartment, another station near Emma's school. They're not expecting direct threats, but we're not taking chances either. Damien set down his coffee, hands shaking slightly. He'd been focused on stopping the immediate crisis, not on what came after. Not on the reality that exposing a conspiracy meant making enemies who had resources and motivation to retaliate. Hey, Celeste said quietly. You're safe. Emma's safe. We've got federal protection and private security. Nobody's getting near either of you. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll do everything possible to make sure you don't regret being brave enough to speak up. She left him with a schedule of meetings, briefings, and interviews that would fill the next 2 weeks. Damien stared at the list, feeling overwhelmed by how quickly his life had transformed from quiet obscurity to the center of something much larger than he'd ever imagined. His first meeting was with the new independent oversight board. 5 people brought in from outside Laurent Dynamics to ensure executive accountability. They asked detailed questions about how he'd discovered the back door, what made him suspicious, why he'd kept investigating after being suspended. Damien answered honestly, not embellishing or downplaying, just the facts of what had happened and why he'd made the choices he made. One board member, a former federal prosecutor named Helen Chang, seemed particularly interested in his decision-making process. Mr. Carter, you risked your career and your family's financial security to pursue concerns that everyone else dismissed. What made you so certain you were right? I wasn't certain, Damien admitted. I was terrified I was wrong and destroying my life over bad analysis, but the alternative was doing nothing and potentially watching people die because I'd been too scared to push back. That felt worse than being wrong. That's not a common personality trait, especially in corporate environments where keeping your head down is usually rewarded. Maybe. But I've got a 7-year-old daughter who thinks her dad is supposed to do the right thing even when it's hard. I couldn't teach her that lesson and then fail to live it when it actually mattered. Helen nodded, making notes. We're recommending your oversight structure become standard across the defense industry, not just at Laurent Dynamics, but everywhere that handles critical infrastructure contracts. Companies need people like you embedded in their operations, with authority to investigate and report without fear of retaliation. That's going to make a lot of executives uncomfortable. Good. Uncomfortable executives make fewer catastrophic mistakes. The meeting ended with the oversight board formally approving Damien's position and authority. He was officially Director of Cyber Integrity, with power to audit any system, investigate any employee up to and including the CEO, and report concerns directly to federal regulators if internal channels proved inadequate. It was simultaneously empowering and terrifying. Lunch was supposed to be a working meal with Voss, but Emma's school called before he could leave his office. The principal again, voice apologetic. Mr. Carter, Emma's fine, but we've had a situation. A journalist tried to approach her during recess, asking questions about you and the Laurent Dynamics case. Our security stopped them immediately, but Emma was pretty shaken up. Damien was already grabbing his jacket. I'm on my way. Mess. There's no immediate danger, but we think it's best if you pick her up early today. We're implementing additional protocols to prevent this from happening again. The drive to Emma's school took 15 minutes that felt like an hour. Damien kept replaying scenarios in his head. Emma cornered by aggressive journalists, Emma scared and alone, Emma learning that being his daughter now came with consequences she hadn't signed up for. She was sitting in the principal's office when he arrived, looking small and tired. Not crying, but close to it. She stood when she saw him, and he caught her in a hug that probably lasted longer than necessary. I'm okay, Emma said into his shoulder. The lady just asked weird questions about whether you were really a hero or if you were just trying to get famous. Mrs. Patterson told her to leave. What did you say? I said my dad wasn't trying to be anything except a good person. Then I told her she should leave me alone because I'm 7 and it's not okay to bother kids. Despite everything, Damien almost smiled. You told a journalist to leave you alone? She was being rude, someone had to. The principal explained the new security measures they were implementing, restricted campus access, verification requirements for anyone claiming to be media, direct coordination with the security detail watching Emma's school. It should have been reassuring, but it just reinforced how much their lives had changed in a week. On the drive home, Emma was quieter than usual. Damien kept glancing at her, trying to figure out if she was scared or angry or just processing. Finally, she asked, "Are people going to keep bothering us?" For a while, probably. This is a big news story and you're connected to it because you're my daughter. I don't want to be connected to a news story. I just want to be a regular kid. I know. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. You did the right thing. That's more important than being regular. She was quiet for a moment. But can we move soon? To that house with the yard you mentioned? I think I'd feel safer somewhere new. Yeah, we can start looking this weekend. That night, Damien called his sister for the first time in months. Sarah lived in Portland, worked as a teacher, and had been offering to help with Emma since their mother died. Damien had always said no, insisting he could handle things alone. Pride, maybe, or stubbornness, or just not wanting to admit he was drowning. I saw you on the news, Sarah said as soon as she answered. You look exhausted. I am exhausted. Are you okay? Is Emma okay? Well, we're fine, mostly. It's been a complicated week. He told her everything, the conspiracy, the confrontation with Brennan, the job offer, the security detail. Sarah listened without interrupting, which was good because if she'd started asking questions, Damien might have broken down completely. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud of you too. Damien felt his throat tighten. Mom would probably say I was reckless and should have thought about Emma first. No. Mom would say you showed Emma what integrity looks like, even when it costs everything. That's not something you can teach with words. You have to live it. Sarah, I'm scared. Not about the job or the investigation, about whether I'm doing right by Emma. She's 7 and dealing with journalists harassing her at school because her dad exposed a conspiracy. That's not fair to her. Nothing about losing her mother at 5 years old was fair either. But you've been there for her every day since, doing your best with impossible circumstances. She knows that. She sees how hard you try. That matters more than whether everything goes perfectly. I missed her parent-teacher conference last week. Because you were stopping a terrorist attack, I think she'll forgive you. They talked for another hour, Sarah sharing stories about her own teaching job, the challenges of helping kids who came from difficult backgrounds. She reminded Damien that parenting wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up consistently and loving your kid even when you were too tired to function. By the time they hung up, Damien felt steadier. Not perfect, not certain everything would work out, just steadier. The next 2 weeks were a blur of federal interviews, media requests that Damien mostly declined, and long days establishing the new oversight protocols at Laurent Dynamics. He worked with Andrea to develop whistleblower protection policies, coordinated with Voss on security audits, and spent hours documenting everything that had gone wrong with Brennan's conspiracy so future employees would know what warning signs to watch for. Celeste kept her distance, not in a cold way, but giving Damien space to establish his own authority. She'd check in occasionally, make sure he had the resources he needed, but she never tried to direct his investigations or influence his decisions. For someone who'd built an empire through force of will, she was surprisingly good at letting go. One afternoon, 3 weeks after starting his new position, Damien found himself in the same conference room where he'd first presented evidence of the back door to Celeste. This time, he was there with federal investigators, walking them through the technical details of how Brennan had hidden his sabotage. Agent Williams, the FBI investigator he'd spoken with on the phone, was thorough and relentless. She asked questions that made Damien reconsider assumptions he'd made, pushed him to explain things in language that non-technical people could understand, forced him to think about implications he'd missed. "Mr. Carter," she said near the end of the session, "we've identified backdoors in systems at 4 other defense contractors. All of them have signatures similar to what you found at Laurent Dynamics. We think Brennan was part of a larger network running this operation across multiple companies simultaneously." "How did they coordinate it without anyone noticing?" "Well, boys meet slowly, carefully. They've been building this network for at least 5 years, recruiting people with access to critical systems, compromising infrastructure piece by piece. If you hadn't found the back door when you did, they would have had access to integrated defense networks covering most of the continental United States." Damien felt sick. What could they have done with that access? Anything. Shut down power grids during winter storms, disable emergency communications during disasters, feed false data to military systems. We're talking about the potential for coordinated attacks that could have paralyzed the country for weeks. But we stopped it. You stopped Laurent Dynamics' piece of it. We're still rooting out the rest. It'll take years to verify every system, trace every connection. Some of these people will escape prosecution because they're in countries we can't touch. But the network is broken. They can't execute the plan they'd been building. That's because of you. After the investigators left, Damien sat alone in the conference room, staring out at the city below. Millions of people going about their lives, completely unaware how close they'd come to disaster. Part of him wanted them to know, wanted recognition for what he'd prevented. But a larger part was glad they didn't. Let them live without fear, without constantly looking over their shoulders, without the weight of knowing how fragile their comfortable world actually was. His phone buzzed. "Emma, science fair is tomorrow. Did you remember to help me with my project?" Damien closed his eyes. He'd completely forgotten. Emma had been working on some robot demonstration for weeks, and he'd promised to help her prepare the presentation board. That was supposed to happen tonight. "I remember," he lied. "We'll work on it after dinner. You forgot, didn't you?" "Maybe a little. It's okay. Mrs. Patterson helped me finish it at aftercare. But you're coming tomorrow, right?" "To watch? I'll be there. Front row. I promise." That evening, Damien left work at exactly 5 p.m. for the first time since starting his new position. He stopped at a craft store, bought poster board and markers and decorative supplies Emma probably didn't need. Then he picked her up from aftercare and took her out for dinner at a restaurant that was too expensive for a weeknight, but felt necessary anyway. "What's this about?" Emma asked, suspicious of the sudden attention. "Can't I just take my daughter to dinner?" "You can, but you usually don't unless something's wrong or you feel guilty about something." "I feel guilty about forgetting your science fair project. I told you it was fine." "It's not fine. I promised to help and I forgot because I was too busy with work. That's not okay." Emma shrugged, the way kids did when they learn not to expect too much. "You're busy a lot. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be used to it."
Damien put down his menu.
Em, I know the last 3 years have been hard. I know I've missed things, forgotten things, been too tired or stressed to really be present. And I know you've never complained because you're trying to make things easier for me. But that's not fair to you. I don't mind. You should mind. You should complain when I mess up. You should tell me when you're upset instead of just accepting it. Emma looked at her plate, pushing food around with her fork. If I complain, it just makes you feel worse. You're already trying so hard. I don't want to make it harder. Damien felt something crack open in his chest. She was 7 years old and carrying weight she shouldn't have to carry, protecting her father's feelings when it should have been the other way around. Listen to me, he said quietly. What happened with Laurent Dynamics, exposing the conspiracy, all of that. I did it because I wanted you to see that doing the right thing matters even when it's scary. But the right thing also includes being present for you, keeping promises, showing up when you need me. Not just when it's convenient, but every time. And if I'm failing at that, I need you to tell me. Can you do that? Emma nodded slowly. Okay, well, I mean it. If I mess up, if I forget something important, you tell me. You don't protect my feelings, you just tell me the truth. Even if it makes you sad, especially if it makes me sad, that's how I get better. They finished dinner talking about Emma's science fair project, a robot she'd built from recycled materials that could sort different types of plastic. It was clever, creative, and completely typical of how her brain worked. She saw problems and figured out solutions without waiting for adults to tell her what to do. The science fair the next day was held in the school gymnasium, which smelled like sweat and industrial cleaner and nervous children. Damien arrived early, claiming a spot near Emma's display table, watching her set up with the kind of focused concentration she brought to everything. Other parents filtered in, some of them recognizing Damien from news coverage and whispering to each other. He tried to ignore it, focused on Emma explaining her project to anyone who stopped to look. She was good at it. Clear explanations, confident delivery, the kind of presentation skills that came naturally to kids who'd learned to advocate for themselves early. The judges came around, 3 adults with clipboards who asked technical questions Emma answered without hesitation. When they moved on, she caught Damien's eye and grinned, clearly pleased with how it had gone. You were amazing, Damien said when the presentations finished and parents were allowed to approach. I know, Mrs. Patterson said my engineering was really advanced for my age. Not humble, though. You told me to tell the truth even if it makes people uncomfortable. The truth is I did good work. Damien laughed. Fair enough. They announced winners an hour later. Emma took second place in her grade division, which was impressive considering she'd done most of the work without her father's help. She accepted her ribbon with the same matter-of-fact confidence she brought to everything, like of course she'd placed. Why wouldn't she? On the drive home, Emma said, I'm glad you came. Me too. Are things going to be different now with your new job? In some ways, I'll have more regular hours, be home more often. But the work itself is still complicated, and sometimes I'll have to stay late or deal with emergencies. The difference is I'm going to try harder to keep promises, to show up for the things that matter to you, like science fairs. Exactly like science fairs. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you like being famous? I'm not famous. A few people recognize me. That's not the same thing. You're on Wikipedia. That's kind of famous. I'd rather just be your dad. You can be both, but being my dad is more important. Yeah, it really is. The following Monday, Laurent Dynamics held a company-wide meeting to announce the completion of their internal investigation and the implementation of new oversight protocols. Celeste stood at the front of the massive auditorium, addressing hundreds of employees who'd spent the last month wondering if they still had jobs. We made mistakes, Celeste said, her voice carrying through the room. I made mistakes. I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted. I ignored warnings I should have investigated. And I nearly cost this company everything because I was more concerned with closing deals than protecting the people who depended on our technology. She looked directly at Damien, who was sitting near the back trying to be invisible. But one person refused to stay quiet. One person looked at what was happening and decided integrity mattered more than keeping his job. Damien Carter saved this company. He saved lives. And he reminded me why we started Laurent Dynamics in the first place. Not to get rich, but to build technology that actually protected people instead of putting them at risk. The room erupted in applause. Damien felt his face flush, uncomfortable with the attention, but unable to deny the warmth of recognition from colleagues who'd watched him go from suspended analyst to company director in a matter of weeks. After the meeting, people approached him, thanking him, asking questions, sharing their own stories of times they'd seen problems, but been too afraid to report them. It was overwhelming and humbling and exhausting all at once. Marcus Webb found him near the elevators, looking emotional. "I should have backed you up," Marcus said. "When you first brought me the backdoor code, I should have fought harder to get people to listen. You did what you could. You escalated it to executive review. That was the right move. But I let them shut you down. I should have pushed back. Marcus, you had a career to protect, a family depending on your income. I understand why you made the choices you made. Still, I'm sorry." They shook hands, an acknowledgement that both of them had been doing their best in an impossible situation. Neither of them perfect, but both of them trying. The weeks turned into months. The federal investigation continued, slowly dismantling the network Brennan had been part of. More arrests were made, more conspirators identified. Damien testified 3 more times, each session exhausting but necessary. Laurent Dynamics rebuilt slowly, carefully, with transparency they'd never practiced before. Celeste implemented the Oversight Board's recommendations, rotating executives to prevent concentration of power, creating channels for employees to report concerns without fear. The company was smaller than it had been, leaner, less flashy, but it was more honest. Damien and Emma moved into a small house in a neighborhood with good schools and a park within walking distance. It wasn't fancy, just 3 bedrooms, a yard that needed work, a garage Emma immediately claimed for her robot projects. But it was theirs, stable, the kind of place where Emma could finally stop worrying about whether they'd be able to afford rent next month. On moving day, Sarah drove down from Portland to help. She and Emma hit it off immediately, Sarah treating Emma like the capable kid she was, instead of talking down to her the way some adults did. "You've done well," Sarah told Damien while Emma was unpacking her room. "Mom would be proud." "I'm not sure. I think she'd say I should have found a way to protect Emma better, keep her out of the spotlight. Mom would say you taught Emma what courage looks like. That's worth more than comfort." 6 months after the summit disaster, Celeste called Damien to her office for what she said was an important conversation. He found her standing at her window, looking out over the city the way she often did when she was thinking through difficult problems. "The board wants to expand your oversight program to other companies," she said without preamble. "They're proposing a consortium approach where major defense contractors share security protocols and embed independent oversight directors with cross-company authority. You'd lead the initiative." That sounds like a massive undertaking. It is. It's also necessary. What happened here could happen anywhere. Hell, it was happening in 4 other companies simultaneously. We got lucky that you found it when you did. Next time, we might not be lucky. What does expanding the program mean for my job here? You'd split time between Laurent Dynamics and the consortium. Still maintain oversight here, but also coordinate with directors at other companies. More travel, bigger scope, significantly more responsibility. She turned from the window. Also more money. Enough that Emma could go to private school if you wanted. College fund fully covered. Security for both of you permanently. Damien thought about Emma, finally settled in their new house, finally feeling safe after months of disruption. Thought about pulling her out of the school where she'd just started making real friends to accommodate his career again. "Can I work remotely when I'm doing consortium coordination? Stay based here instead of relocating? We can make that work. And Emma comes first. If she has a science fair or a school play, or just needs her dad around, that takes priority over meetings." Womankan. "Done. Then I'll think about it." That's not a no. That's a, I need to talk to my daughter before making decisions that affect her life. Celeste smiled. "You're a better parent than I gave you credit for." That night, Damien explained the opportunity to Emma over dinner. She listened carefully, asked smart questions about what it meant for their routine, then said something that surprised him. "You should do it." "Just like that?" You don't want to think about it? You spent all this time fighting to make companies safer. If you can help more companies do what Laurent Dynamics is doing, that means more people are safe. That's important. You're more important. I know. That's why you asked me before deciding, but I think you should do it anyway. What if I have to travel sometimes? Aunt Sarah said she'd visit whenever you need her, and I'm getting older. I don't need you around every second, just for the important stuff. Damien looked at his 7-year-old daughter, who somehow had more wisdom than most adults he knew, and realized she was right. He could do both. Be her father and do work that mattered. It wouldn't be perfect. He'd still miss things sometimes, still make mistakes. But as long as he kept showing up for the important moments, as long as Emma knew she came first, they'd be okay. All right, he said. I'll tell Celeste, yes. Good. Now can we watch that show about the talking animals again? The consortium launched 4 months later, bringing together 8 major defense contractors under unified oversight protocols. Damien became Director of Integrated Cyber Integrity, coordinating security audits across companies, establishing communication channels for sharing threat intelligence, and training other oversight directors in how to identify and investigate potential sabotage. It was exhausting, complicated work, but it mattered. And every time Damien felt overwhelmed, he'd remember that moment in the parking garage when he'd decided to run his unauthorized analysis program despite knowing it could destroy his career. He'd been terrified then, but he'd done it anyway. That same courage, that same commitment to doing the right thing even when it was hard, carried him through the challenges of building something new, of creating systems that prioritize safety over profit, transparency over convenience, integrity over comfort. One evening, almost a year after the summit disaster, Damien found himself sitting at a small cafe with Celeste. Not a business meeting, just 2 people who'd been through something impossible together and needed to process what it meant. Do you ever regret it? Celeste asked. Pushing back the way you did? You could have just accepted my decision, kept your head down, lived a quieter life. Sometimes I think about how much simpler things would be if I'd stayed quiet. No journalists bothering Emma, no federal investigations, no security details. Just a regular job with regular problems. But I also think about all the people who would have died if I'd made that choice. Hospital systems failing during a winter storm. Emergency services unable to coordinate during a disaster. All those people just trying to live their lives, depending on infrastructure that would have been deliberately sabotaged. You saved them. I gave them the chance to be saved. The actual work was done by federal investigators, security analysts, all the people who dismantled Brennan's network. I just pointed everyone in the right direction. Don't undersell what you did. Most people, when faced with that choice, pick comfort over courage. You didn't. Damien thought about Emma, probably at home doing homework while Sarah made dinner. Thought about how his daughter saw him differently now. Not just as a tired father struggling to keep things together, but as someone who'd proven that standing up for what was right actually mattered. I had a good teacher, Damien said. 7 years old, way too smart for her own good, keeps reminding me that the right thing is usually the hard thing. She sounds remarkable. Yeah, she really is. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd nearly destroyed each other and somehow ended up better for it. Celeste had learned to listen when people questioned her decisions. Damien had learned that speaking up, even when terrified, could actually change things. The world outside the cafe window kept moving, people heading home from work, traffic flowing through streets, lights coming on as evening settled over the city. None of them knew how close they'd come to disaster. None of them knew that a single father and a billionaire CEO had stopped something that could have paralyzed the country. Maybe that was okay. Maybe the work of protecting people was supposed to be invisible, noticed only when it failed. The real victory wasn't recognition or praise. It was all those people going about their lives, safe and unaware, depending on systems that worked because someone had cared enough to make sure they did. 2 years after the summit disaster, Emma's school held a career day. Damien volunteered, showing up in his Director of Integrated Cyber Integrity capacity, prepared to talk about cybersecurity in terms that 4th graders could understand. Emma introduced him to her class with obvious pride. This is my dad. He stops bad people from breaking important computer systems. The presentation went well. Kids asked surprisingly smart questions about hackers and security and why people did bad things. But the moment that mattered most came at the end, when a quiet girl in the back raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, were you scared when you found the bad code?" "Terrified," Damien admitted. "I thought I might lose my job, lose everything I'd worked for." "But you told people anyway?" "Yeah, because being scared isn't a good reason not to do the right thing. It's just a feeling. You can feel scared and still act brave." The girl nodded, processing this. Emma caught Damien's eye and smiled, and he realized this was why it had all mattered. Not the job title or the salary or the recognition, but teaching his daughter, and kids like this girl, that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway. On the drive home after the presentation, Emma said, "I'm proud of you. I know. No, I mean really proud. Not just because you did something important, but because you show me every day what it means to be a good person, even when it's hard." Damien felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Em." "You're welcome. Now can we get ice cream?" "I think we both earned it." They stopped at the ice cream shop near their house, the one that stayed open late and had too many flavors to choose from. Emma got her usual, chocolate with cookie dough, while Damien tried something new just because he could. They sat outside on a bench, watching cars pass, eating ice cream that was too cold for the evening weather, but perfect anyway. Just a father and daughter, having one of those ordinary moments that made all the extraordinary chaos worth enduring. "Dad?" Emma asked around a mouthful of ice cream. "Yeah?" "Do you think things will stay this way, stable and safe?" "I hope so. But even if they don't, we'll handle it together. That's what we do." "Deal, sit." The world was complicated, messy, full of problems that didn't have easy solutions. There would always be people like Brennan, willing to sacrifice others for personal gain. There would always be systems that needed protecting, vulnerabilities that needed fixing, threats that required constant vigilance. But there would also always be people like Damien, ordinary people doing their best in impossible situations, choosing courage over comfort, integrity over convenience. And maybe that was enough. Maybe the accumulation of those small, brave choices was what actually kept the world running, what actually protected the people who depended on systems they'd never even think about. Damien finished his ice cream, threw away the napkin, and took Emma's hand as they walked back to their car. Tomorrow he'd go back to work coordinating oversight across multiple companies, dealing with threats most people would never know existed. But tonight, he was just a father taking his daughter home, grateful for stability and safety and the chance to teach her that doing the right thing actually mattered. That was enough. That was everything. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't stopping one conspiracy or exposing one corrupt executive. It was building a life where courage became habit, where speaking up felt natural instead of terrifying, where the next generation learned that integrity wasn't just something you talked about. It was something you lived, even when the cost felt unbearable. Emma would grow up knowing her father had faced impossible choices and chosen correctly more often than not. She'd grow up understanding that heroes weren't people who never got scared. They were people who got scared and did the right thing anyway. And maybe someday, when Emma faced her own impossible choice, she'd remember her father sitting in a parking garage, hands shaking, deciding to run an unauthorized program that could cost him everything. She'd remember how he'd been terrified but had done it anyway. And maybe that memory would give her the courage to make her own hard choices when her turn came. That was the legacy Damien was building. Not fame or fortune or recognition, just the quiet knowledge that he'd taught his daughter what courage looked like, and she'd carry that lesson forward into whatever impossible situations life threw at her. They drove home through the city, past glass towers where other people made other decisions, past neighborhoods where other families built their own versions of safety and stability. The Laurent Dynamics scandal had faded from headlines, replaced by newer crises and fresher controversies. But the systems Damien had helped create continued working, protecting people who'd never know his name, and that was exactly how it should be. The best security was invisible. The best courage was quiet. The best victories were the disasters that never happened because someone had cared enough to prevent them. Damien pulled into their driveway, helped Emma gather her school things, and walked with her to the front door of the house they'd built together through sheer stubborn determination to do better. "Home?" Emma said, smiling up at him. "Yeah, Damien agreed. Home.